Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight, we're going to explore a true story, one that unfolds slowly, carefully. Like the turning of pages in an old book, this is a story about secrets hidden behind the perfect facade of a Texas mansion. About a life built on lies, and about the night everything came crashing down. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders drop, and let me tell you about Greg Williams. In the wealthy suburb of Keller, Texas, just outside Fort Worth, there stood a gated community where manicured lawns stretched beneath the warm Texas sun. Behind wrought iron gates and pristine sidewalks, families lived the American dream. And in one particular house on Jacob Lane, that dream seemed especially bright in the autumn of 2011. Greg Williams was 40 years old that fall. He was a successful IT entrepreneur who had built his computer technology business from the ground up. Those who knew him described him as energetic, peppy, despite the long hours he worked. He was a man who loved martial arts and bodybuilding, someone who took care of himself and worked hard for what he had. His blue eyes were striking, the kind that people remembered, the kind his wife would later say she missed most. Greg lived in an $800,000 home with his wife Michelle and their 4-year-old daughter Michaela. In the garage sat 2 matching Mercedes, anniversary gifts the couple had given each other. In the yard, there was already a pool, but Greg was designing another one, something special just for little Michaela. He was also planning a built-in aquarium for their new house, a dream house they were about to purchase. His mother would later remember this time with particular clarity. She said Greg was excited, maybe even more excited than usual. He was tired from the long hours at work, yes. But he was happy, he was bubbly, he was looking forward to the future. The closing on the new house was just days away. Everything in Greg Williams' life seemed to be falling into place. But of course, as you've already guessed, that's not how this story ends. To understand what happened in that house on Jacob Lane, we need to understand Michelle Williams. Born Michelle Marie, she was a woman who had lived many lives, worn many names, and left a trail of broken relationships in her wake. Michelle had been married 3 times before she met Greg. She had 3 children from previous relationships, 2 sons, Lee and Andrew O'Brien, and a daughter. Her life before Greg was characterized by constant movement, constant change. Her sons would later describe their childhood as unstable, moving from motel to motel, from trailer to trailer, as Michelle found new men in her life. They said they were never her priority. There was a pattern to Michelle's life, a cycle that repeated itself with each new relationship. Michelle was a marketing major when she first married. Over the years, she developed what some would call a talent for reinvention. She knew how to present herself, how to become what someone needed her to be. Her ex-husbands would later speak about her with a remarkable consistency. They all mentioned her infidelity, her manipulations, her ability to lie with conviction. But when Michelle met Greg Williams in 2007, something seemed different. Or perhaps from Michelle's perspective, this was simply the biggest opportunity yet. Greg treated me like a queen, Michelle would later say in an interview. He took me from day one and put me on an untouchable pedestal. Nobody's ever treated me that way. He was my knight in shining armor. They married in 2008. For Michelle, it must have felt like she'd finally arrived. The $800,000 house, the matching Mercedes, the successful husband bringing in over $500,000 a year. No more motels. No more struggling. This was the life she'd always wanted. But Greg's family never warmed to her. His sister, Michelle Fletcher, and his brother, Michael, both felt from the beginning that something was off. Michael was there on Greg and Michelle's first date, and what he witnessed at the nightclub afterward left him uncomfortable. He would later struggle to describe her behavior on television without being crude. His sister was more direct. She simply didn't like Michelle from the very start. Greg's sons from Michelle's previous relationships had their own complicated feelings. Her older son, Lee, would later say he hated Greg. He didn't use that word lightly, but he genuinely hated him. He said Greg was a horrible human being. Andrew, the younger son, agreed. They described a dark side to Greg. Parties where dangerous-looking people showed up. Men with the outline of pistols visible in their pants. But they also saw something else. The way their mother was with money. The way she spent as fast as Greg could earn. Still, on the surface, everything looked perfect. The happy couple. The beautiful daughter. The dream house in the making. And then came August of 2011. On August 12, 2011, Greg Williams took out a new life insurance policy. It was for $150,000 through Gerber Life Insurance Company. The beneficiary was listed as his 4-year-old daughter, Michaela. This policy had a clause in it, something called a suicide clause. It stated that if the insured person died by suicide within 2 years of obtaining the policy, no benefits would be paid. This is standard practice in the insurance industry, designed to prevent people from taking out policies with the intention of immediately taking their own lives. But this wasn't the only life insurance policy on Greg's life. There were 3 in total. The second was another policy for $150,000. With Garden Life Insurance Company, obtained back in May of 2008, shortly after Greg and Michelle married. Michelle was the beneficiary on this one, and it too had a 2-year suicide clause. The third policy was the largest, $500,000. With Pavonia Life Insurance, formerly Household Life Insurance. This one had been obtained in January of 2009. Michelle was the beneficiary, and like the others, it came with a 2-year suicide clause. Altogether, the policies totaled $800,000. Michelle stood to collect $650,000 of it. Just 2 months after that newest policy was purchased, everything would change. October 13th, 2011 was a Thursday. In 2 days, Greg and Michelle were scheduled to close on their new dream house. The swimming pool design was nearly finalized. The aquarium plans were coming together. Everything was moving forward. That night, as was often the case, Michelle said she fell asleep on the couch in the living room, with little Michaela beside her. Greg went to bed in the master bedroom, exhausted from another long day of work. At approximately 4:40 in the morning, the Keller Police Department received a 911 call. The dispatcher could hear panic in the caller's voice. Michelle Williams reported that an intruder had broken into their home. He had hit her. He had shot her husband. He might still be in the house. Police arrived quickly at the home on Jacob Lane. The gate logs showed only one vehicle had entered the subdivision in the hours surrounding the call. It belonged to the newspaper delivery person. When officers entered the Williams residence, they found a disturbing scene, but not the one Michelle had described. Greg Williams lay in his bed, shot in the right temple. A single shell casing was found nearby. Blood pooled around his head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Near the back door, investigators discovered a .45 caliber handgun and a long wrench, both conspicuously placed as if staged for discovery. Both were wiped clean of fingerprints. Michelle had a bruise on her cheek, which she said came from being struck by the intruder with the wrench. She maintained that a man dressed in black had broken in, knocked her unconscious briefly, shot her husband, and fled out the back door. Their 4-year-old daughter had supposedly slept through the entire incident, but as police examined the scene more carefully, things didn't add up. There was no sign of forced entry. The back door, which Michelle claimed the intruder had pried open, showed damage that could only have been made while the door was already open. Someone had staged it to look like a break-in. The $20,000 in cash that the couple kept in the house hadn't been touched. No fingerprints were found on the murder weapon or the wrench. And perhaps most tellingly, a neighbor's security camera footage showed no unauthorized vehicles entering or leaving the gated community. Canine units from both Keller and nearby Bedford were brought in to search for any trace of an intruder. They found nothing. Officers went door to door through the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious. No one had. Within hours, investigators knew they weren't looking for an intruder. They were looking at Michelle Williams. Sergeant John McGrew asked Michelle if she would accompany him to the Keller Police Department for an interview. She agreed, cooperative despite her injury and the ice pack pressed to her face. In the interrogation room, Michelle maintained her story about the intruder dressed in black, but Sergeant McGrew was patient. He pointed out the inconsistencies, the lack of forced entry, the pristine condition of the weapons, the missing intruder on the security footage, the untouched cash. He asked her what really happened. She insisted on the intruder. He asked her again. She repeated the same story. He asked her a third time, then a fourth, then a fifth. After hours in that room, after Sergeant McGrew had asked her for the eighth time what truly happened, Michelle's story finally changed. She now claimed that Greg had committed suicide. She said she'd found him dead, and in a panic, she'd staged the scene to make it look like an intruder had killed him. She said she did this to protect their daughter, so Michaela wouldn't have to grow up knowing her father had taken his own life. Michelle told the detectives exactly how she'd staged the crime scene. She said she'd wiped Greg's hand and the gun with disinfecting wipes, then flushed the wipes down the toilet. She'd scratched around the doorframe to simulate forced entry. She'd hit herself in the face with the wrench to create the bruise that would support her intruder story. She'd placed the gun and wrench by the back door to make them obvious, impossible to overlook. After 5 hours in the interrogation room, police released Michelle Williams. They had her changing stories on tape. They had a staged crime scene, but they needed more before they could make an arrest. Michelle went home to her sons, who had rushed to be with her in her supposed time of grief. In the days following Greg's death, Michelle's behavior struck many as unusual. Her son Andrew described her emotional state as a big roller coaster. Some days she would cry hard. Other days she would laugh. She told different people different stories about what had happened. She told her sons both the intruder story and the suicide story, going back and forth as if she couldn't decide which lies she wanted to believe more. A few days after the shooting, Michelle pulled Andrew aside. They'd been cleaning up the house together, trying to restore some normalcy, when she asked him to step outside. What she said next would eventually help convict her. Michelle asked Andrew to do something for her. She wanted him to call a friend. She wanted that friend to buy an extra-large sweater. She wanted the friend to wear garbage bags under the sweater so no DNA would transfer. Then she wanted them to go somewhere and fire a pistol while wearing the sweater, so gunshot residue would cover it. Finally, she wanted Andrew to break into Greg's ex-wife Kathy's car, plant the sweater under a seat, and call in an anonymous tip to police that Kathy had killed Greg. Andrew told his mother he would do it, but he had no intention of following through. He thought she was having a mental breakdown. He just said yes to calm her down, to walk away from the conversation. Then Michelle asked Andrew something that crossed a line he couldn't ignore. She asked if his brother Lee might have killed Greg. That was the moment Andrew stopped talking to his mother. On November 3rd, 2011, the medical examiner's office officially ruled Greg Williams' death a homicide. The autopsy showed that he'd been shot from a distance of 6 to 24 inches away. Forensic analysis revealed that Greg had been given a sedative before he was shot. This wasn't a suicide at all. The angle and distance of the shot made it impossible for Greg to have pulled the trigger himself. Meanwhile, investigators were discovering more about Michelle's activities after her husband's death. She was liquidating everything Greg had owned. She sold his IT company, but continued cashing checks meant for the business. She tried to claim his massive life insurance policies, but was denied at the last moment when questions arose about his death. She announced she was dating someone new, a bodybuilder and personal trainer named Gene Wallace. Gene was 15 years her junior. More significantly, he was Lee's best friend, a frequent guest in Greg's home during his lifetime. Within months of Greg's death, Michelle and Gene had opened a fitness business together in Bedford. Michelle had also adopted a new name. She was now going by Shelley Williams, reinventing herself once again. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram featured Shelley and Gene in a promotional video for their fitness business, just 3 months after Michelle had been indicted for murder. The newspaper made no connection between accused murderer Michelle Williams and fitness instructor Shelley. According to court documents, Michelle also tampered with her ankle monitor while out on bond. She worked at a sports bar and then at what was euphemistically described as a gentleman's club. Data from her ankle monitor showed she never visited a doctor's office despite telling court officials she was pregnant. On January 9th, 2012, nearly 3 months after Greg's death. Michelle Williams was arrested and charged with murder. She also faced charges of making a false report to police and tampering with physical evidence. Her bail was set at $522,000, but was later reduced to $82,000. She bonded out after just 1 week. In July of 2012, a Tarrant County grand jury indicted Michelle on charges of murder and tampering with evidence in the shooting death of her husband. Lead prosecutor Jack Strickland had a problem. He believed absolutely that Michelle had murdered Greg, but his case had weaknesses. The Keller Police Department was relatively inexperienced with murder investigations, and they'd made mistakes at the crime scene. There was cross-contamination between the bedding and Greg's body. When Greg had been transported to the medical examiner's office, he'd simply been wrapped in the sheets from the bed. There was no DNA evidence linking Michelle to the murder. She'd cleaned it all up herself. Worried about these holes in his case, Strickland offered Michelle a plea bargain. Rather than face trial for murder, she could plead guilty to 2 lesser charges: tampering with evidence and deadly conduct, which Texas law defines as wielding a weapon irresponsibly. The deal would result in an 18-year sentence, with the possibility of parole after 6 years. In the summer of 2014, Michelle accepted the plea deal. She pleaded guilty to both charges. All that remained was the formal sentencing hearing. Then something unexpected happened. Before Judge Scott Wish could formally sentence her, Michelle Williams granted an interview to the CBS News program. 48 Hours, the show was doing a story on her case, and Michelle agreed to speak with correspondent Peter Van Sant from her jail cell. During that jailhouse interview, Michelle contradicted everything she'd agreed to in her plea deal. She told Van Sant she was innocent of all charges. She said she'd only taken the plea deal because she was hoping for a short sentence so she could be reunited with her daughter, Michaela. She said she was confident she'd make parole when first eligible. When Judge Wish learned about this interview and Michelle's claims of innocence, he was furious. The entire point of a plea deal is that the defendant accepts responsibility. Michelle had just announced to a national television audience that she'd done no such thing. In February of 2014, Judge Wish threw out the plea agreement entirely. The murder charge was reinstated. Michelle Williams would go to trial after all. The 48 Hours episode that had aired in April 2014 had just turned Michelle's life upside down, and perhaps in a way it had finally brought her to justice. In September of 2014, 3 years after Greg's death, Michelle Williams went on trial for murder. The jury would hear testimony from dozens of witnesses about her character, her lies, her manipulations, and the evidence against her. The prosecution's first witness was Andrew O'Brien, Michelle's younger son. He told the court about his mother's request that he frame Greg's ex-wife for murder. He described the elaborate scheme with the sweater, the garbage bags, the planted evidence. He told them how she'd asked if his brother Lee might have killed Greg. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Andrew also revealed something else. 2 days before Greg died, Michelle's nephews Trace and Tyler recalled that Michelle had joked about killing Greg and moving to Mexico with his insurance money. 48 hours later, Greg was dead. The prosecution laid out their theory. Michelle had married Greg for his money. She'd spent extravagantly faster than even Greg's successful business could sustain. She'd taken out life insurance policies on him, with herself as the primary beneficiary. When she'd purchased that final policy in August 2011, she'd started planning. The prosecution pointed out that Michelle had purchased a magazine called Paladin Press while living in Colorado with Greg. This publication detailed assassination techniques, how to change identities, killing methods, and information about poisons. They argued this showed premeditation. They explained how Michelle had administered a sedative to Greg, waited until he was unconscious in bed, then shot him in the temple from close range. She'd staged the crime scene to look like a burglary. She'd wiped away evidence. She'd rehearsed her story about the intruder in black. The defense attorneys tried to convince the jury that Greg had actually committed suicide and that Michelle had simply panicked and covered it up. They pointed out that Greg was bringing in over $800,000 in 2011. Why would Michelle kill him when he was earning more than double what the insurance payout would be? They criticized the physical evidence and the handling of the investigation. They argued that it was possible for Greg to have shot himself from that angle. They said their client was no career criminal, that this wasn't something she'd had time to think about. that she'd simply panicked. But the prosecution had one more piece of evidence to present: the 48 Hours episode itself. They played excerpts for the jury, showing Michelle's own words contradicting her guilty plea, watching her tell the world she was innocent while her sons and Greg's family suffered. Michelle Williams never took the stand to explain her many changing stories. Without her testimony, the defense faced an uphill battle. After 7 hours of deliberation, on September 29, 2014, the jury reached their verdict: guilty of murder, guilty of tampering with a firearm. The sentencing phase brought even more revelations about Michelle's behavior. Prosecutors called witnesses to discuss her conduct while out on bond. She'd faked a pregnancy, claiming she was expecting twins with Gene Wallace, possibly to delay proceedings. When Judge Wish learned she'd lied about the pregnancy, he'd hauled her back to court. She'd tampered with her GPS monitor. She'd taken a secret beach vacation with her boyfriend while supposedly grieving and awaiting trial. The jury deliberated for about 2 hours on her sentence. On September 30th, 2014, they handed down their decision: 60 years in prison for murder, 10 years for tampering with a firearm. To be served concurrently, Michelle would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. She would be 75 years old. The judge noted the irony. The plea deal Michelle had rejected would have given her just 18 years, with possible parole after 6. By proclaiming her innocence on television, she'd effectively added 42 years to her sentence. In the courtroom, Greg's family finally had their moment to speak. His mother, Betty, addressed Michelle directly through tears. "Greg loved and trusted you with his business and his life," she said. "Now Greg is gone and he'll never see his daughters grow up." Michelle's own sons had testified against her. They'd chosen truth and justice over loyalty to the woman who'd given birth to them. Lee would later reflect on his relationship with his mother, saying that Mom carried more meaning than the word love, but that Michelle would never be his mom. She was his mother biologically, but she'd never filled that role. Andrew spoke about learning to take control of his own life again, after years of being controlled by her tears, her crying, her lies. Even after Michelle's conviction, questions lingered during the investigation and trial. Another mysterious death had come to light, one that occurred before Greg Williams died. In August of 2010, a man named Bryn Fletcher was found dead in Ellis County, Texas. He'd been shot and police ruled it a suicide within 1 week. Bryn Fletcher was Greg Williams' brother-in-law. He worked for Greg's IT company, GW Solutions. On the day of his death, Bryn had left his home in Terrell at 6:30 in the morning for a business trip to Waco. When he didn't arrive by 10 o'clock, his boss, Greg Williams, grew concerned. For hours, many people tried to contact Bryn. Then, his body was discovered. The police file on Bryn Fletcher's death is oddly incomplete, raising more questions than it answers. One report lists the gunshot wound as being to the right eye. Another report says it was to the mouth. Despite ruling his death a suicide, police never released the gun or photos from the incident to Bryn's wife, Michelle Fletcher. After Michelle Williams was indicted for Greg's murder, the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office looked into Bryn's death with fresh eyes. An investigator examined the gun to rule it out as a possible murder weapon in Greg's case. Michelle Fletcher was told they were keeping the gun in case new evidence emerged suggesting Bryn's death wasn't suicide, but murder. The timing was troubling. Bryn Fletcher died in August 2010. Greg Williams died in October 2011. Just 14 months later, both men were connected to Michelle Williams. Both deaths involved gunshots. Both were initially questioned as potential suicides, though Michelle Williams was never charged in connection with Bryn Fletcher's death, and authorities have not officially connected the two cases. The questions remain. The Ellis County Sheriff's Office has stated they have no plans to reopen Bryn's case. Through her lawyer, Michelle Williams has denied any involvement in Bryn Fletcher's death. But the shadow of doubt lingers over that earlier death, a dark prologue to the murder that would finally bring Michelle Williams to justice. Today, Michelle Williams remains incarcerated at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She is serving her 60-year sentence for the murder of Greg Williams. In 30 years, when she becomes eligible for parole, she will be 75 years old. Given the nature of her crime and her behavior throughout the investigation and trial, parole is far from guaranteed. Her daughter, Michaela, who was 4 years old when her father was murdered, is now a teenager. She lost her father to violence and her mother to prison. The swimming pool Greg was designing for her was never built. The aquarium never installed. The new dream house never became their home. Greg's family continues to advocate against Michelle's eventual parole. They maintain a presence in parole opposition groups, determined that Greg's killer will serve significant time for taking his life. His mother, his siblings, his daughters from a previous marriage, they all carry the weight of his absence. Lee and Andrew O'Brien have worked to rebuild their lives apart from their mother's influence. They've spoken publicly about their experiences, about the manipulation and lies that characterized their childhood, about the difficult decision to testify against her. They've had to reconcile the fact that the woman who gave them life also took the life of their stepfather, a man they didn't like but who didn't deserve to die. Gene Wallace, the much younger boyfriend who opened a fitness business with Michelle while she was out on bond, has disappeared from public view. His relationship with Lee O'Brien, once his best friend, was irreparably damaged. The house on Jacob Lane in Keller's Twin Lakes subdivision eventually sold. A new family lives there now, perhaps unaware of the violence that occurred within those walls. Of the man who was shot as he slept. Of the wife who staged a crime scene and called 911 with manufactured panic in her voice. The story of Michelle Williams and the murder of Greg Williams is, at its core, a story about lies. Michelle lied about the intruder. She lied about the suicide. She lied to investigators, to her family, to her sons, to the media. She lived a life built on deception, reinventing herself again and again, moving from relationship to relationship, always looking for the next opportunity, the next knight in shining armor, to place her on a pedestal. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case is the lies Michelle told herself. To murder your husband as he sleeps, to stage an elaborate crime scene, to look your children in the eye and manipulate them into believing different versions of events, to try to frame innocent people for your crime. These acts require a profound disconnect from reality and from basic human empathy. The jury saw through the lies. The evidence spoke clearly despite Michelle's attempts to erase it, and in the end justice was served. Not because of perfect police work or flawless prosecution, but because Michelle herself couldn't maintain the facade. She told too many stories, she changed her narrative too many times. And when given the gift of a plea deal that would have significantly reduced her sentence, she couldn't help but go on national television and claim innocence, sabotaging her own agreement in a final act of self-destructive narcissism. Let's return for a moment to that house on Jacob Lane. It's the early morning hours of October 13th, 2011. The sun hasn't yet risen over the wealthy suburb of Keller. The streets are quiet. The gated community sleeps. In the master bedroom, Greg Williams lies in bed, exhausted from another long day building his business, dreaming perhaps of the new house, the pool for his daughter, the bright future just days away. He doesn't know that his wife has given him something to make him sleep more deeply. He doesn't know that she's standing over him with his own gun in her hand. He doesn't wake when she pulls the trigger. In the living room, 4-year-old Michaela sleeps on the couch, unaware that her world is about to shatter. The loud noise that will supposedly wake her mother doesn't disturb her at all. Helen moves through the house with purpose now. She wipes down the gun, careful to remove any fingerprints. She places it by the back door, along with the wrench. She scratches at the doorframe, creating the illusion of forced entry. She hits herself in the face with the wrench, hard enough to leave a bruise. Evidence of her story. She flushes the cleaning wipes down the toilet. Then she calls 911, and the lies begin. But in that moment, before the sirens, before the interrogation, before the trial, and the verdict in the prison cell, there is just silence. The silence of the house where a man has been murdered. The silence that stretches between the truth and the lie. The silence that Michelle Williams would spend the next 3 years trying to fill with different stories, different versions of events, until finally, inevitably, the silence gave way to justice. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that truth has a weight to it. Lies can be elaborate. They can be convincing. They can be maintained for days or months or even years. But they're weightless. And eventually they float away, revealing what was always underneath. The simple, heavy truth. Greg Williams was murdered by his wife as he slept in his bed. She cleaned up the evidence. She staged the scene. She lied to everyone. But in the end, the truth was heavier than all her lies combined. And now, as you close your eyes, let the weight of this story settle over you like a blanket. Let the truth of it, the finality of justice, bring you peace. The mystery is solved. The killer is caught. The story is told. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. Tonight's story is one of those that reminds us how fragile life can be, how quickly everything can change in a single moment. It's a story about a young woman named Kelsey Schelling, whose life was full of promise, whose future seemed bright, and whose disappearance would leave a family searching for answers for 8 long years. This is a story that unfolds slowly, like many true crime cases do. There are no sudden shocks here. Just the quiet, methodical unraveling of what happened on a cold February night in Colorado. Kelsey Jean Schelling was born on February 18th, 1991 in Colorado. She grew up in a world that, like many childhoods, had its share of complications. Her parents, Doug Schelling and Laura Saxton, divorced when Kelsey was a teenager, and the young girl found herself navigating the emotional turbulence that often comes with family separation. Those who knew Kelsey described her as bubbly. That word came up again and again when people spoke about her. Bubbly, spirited, personable, fun-loving. She had one of those personalities that filled a room. There was nothing quiet about Kelsey, her friends would say. She was the kind of person who made you feel seen, who was genuinely interested in people, who lit up when she talked to you. Kelsey had studied psychology at Northeastern Junior College in Colorado. She was curious about people, about what made them tick, about the complexities of the human mind. Perhaps this stemmed from her own struggles, because beneath that bubbly exterior, Kelsey had wrestled with darkness. After her parents' divorce, depression crept into her life. As a teenager, she attempted to take her own life. Years later, when she was 19, she tried again. One evening, she called her close friend and coworker, Allie Cox, and simply said she needed help. Allie rushed over to find that Kelsey had taken too many pills. Together, they went to the hospital, and Kelsey got the help she needed. But Kelsey was resilient. She fought her battles with mental health, and according to those who knew her, she was winning. By 2013, when she was 21 years old, Kelsey was working at a floor and decor store just outside Denver. She was close with her family, especially her mother, Laura. They spoke frequently, sometimes multiple times a day. Kelsey was the kind of daughter who kept in touch, who shared her life openly, who wanted her family to be part of her journey. At this point in her life, Kelsey was in an on-again, off-again relationship with a man named Dante Lucas. Dante was from Pueblo, Colorado, a city about 2 hours south of Denver. He had once been a college basketball player, someone with athletic aspirations and dreams. But by 2013, those dreams had faded. His friends and family would later describe him as someone who was often late, unreliable, someone who didn't always follow through. Kelsey's friends didn't like Dante. They told investigators that the relationship was toxic, tumultuous, filled with highs and lows. They said Dante was degrading to Kelsey, that he used her for money, for her apartment, for her car. Some friends reported that Dante had been physically abusive, that he'd pushed Kelsey when he was angry. One friend recalled that Kelsey had once called out of work because she had bruises on her neck. She claimed at the time that her father had caused them, but investigators would later determine her father had been hours away when the incident allegedly occurred. The question remained, who had hurt Kelsey? But despite all of this, despite the warnings from friends, despite the red flags, Kelsey loved Dante. She loved him unconditionally. She confided in her friends that Dante didn't feel the same way about her, that his feelings were inconsistent, that he could be cold, but she held on to hope that things would change, that love would be enough. On February 4th, 2013, Kelsey's life took a significant turn. That morning she had an appointment with an obstetrician. She was 8 weeks pregnant. The pregnancy had been unexpected. Kelsey wasn't sure how Donnie would react. But as she sat in that doctor's office and saw the ultrasound image for the first time, something shifted inside her. She felt joy. She felt hope. She wanted this baby. She wanted to be a mother. After the appointment, Kelsey called her mother, Laura, as she was driving back to work. Her voice was a mix of nervousness and excitement. She told Laura about the pregnancy. Laura, though initially shocked, remained calm. She listened. And then she told her daughter something that would echo in her mind for years to come. She said, "I will support you any way I can. The whole family will support you. It's going to be okay." Kelsey seemed relieved. She told her mother that she was excited about the baby, that she wanted to keep it. Laura asked about Donnie and Kelsey's tone changed. She said she didn't think Donnie wanted to be with her, that she wasn't sure how he would react to the news. But Laura reassured her daughter. They would figure it out together. After hanging up with her mother, Kelsey sent text messages to other family members. She sent the ultrasound photo to her father Doug, to her brother, and to friends. She even sent it to Donbe. Then she went to her shift at Floor and Decor, where she worked from 1 in the afternoon until just before 10 o'clock that night. Throughout that day, text messages flew back and forth between Kelsey and Donkey. The messages told a story of manipulation, of someone slowly reeling another person in. Donkey had actually started texting Kelsey the day before, on February 3rd, asking her to come to Pueblo. He told her he wanted to take her on a short road trip, just a couple of hours. He said he had a surprise for her. "Just wait and see for yourself," he wrote. "You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you anyway. So you can see for yourself." Kelsey was hesitant. She told him she had a doctor's appointment the next day. She was tired. She had work. But Donnie persisted. On February 4th, after she sent him the ultrasound photo, the messages continued. He pressed her to come to Pueblo. He told her the surprise was waiting. Kelsey's friends would later say that the text messages from Donnie that day seemed calculated. He knew what to say to get her to drive down. He played on her emotions, on her hope that maybe he would step up, that maybe he would want to be part of this baby's life. That evening, after Kelsey clocked out of work at 9:54 p.m., she made a decision. She would drive to Pueblo. She would see what Donnie's surprise was. Maybe it would be good news. Maybe he wanted to talk about their future. She grabbed a Victoria's Secret bag and packed a day's worth of clothing and personal items. She put on a light gray jacket, a black coat with fur on the hood, black Victoria's Secret workout pants, and tan Ugg boots. She got into her car, a black 2011 Chevrolet Cruze, and began the 2-hour drive south to Pueblo. She arrived at the Walmart on Northern Avenue in Pueblo at around 11 o'clock that night. She texted Dante to let him know she was there. Then she waited and waited. An hour passed. Dante hadn't shown up. At around midnight, Kelsey sent another text. She was tired of waiting, she wrote. If he didn't show up soon, she was going to head home. Minutes later, Dante responded. He asked her to meet him at a different location. Kelsey, exhausted but still hopeful, complied. She drove to the new location. About 30 minutes later, she sent her final text message to Dante. "Where are you?" she wrote. "I've been here for over an hour, just waiting." That was the last time anyone heard from Kelsey Schelling. The next day, February 5th, was a Tuesday. Kelsey was supposed to work her shift at Floor and Decor, but she didn't show up. Her supervisor, Savannah Martin, found this odd. Kelsey was reliable. She always called if she couldn't make it. But that morning, Martin received text messages from Kelsey's phone saying she was really sick and had gone to the emergency room. Martin was confused. Just the day before, Kelsey had told her that the pregnancy checkup went well, that the doctor said everything was fine. Now she was in the ER. Martin told her not to come in, to rest and feel better. But something about the messages felt off. The grammar wasn't quite right. The The phrasing didn't sound like Kelsey. Martin couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That same day, Kelsey's father, Doug, tried calling his daughter. He sent her a text telling her to call him. He received a response saying she wasn't feeling well and was lying on the couch, but Kelsey never called him back. On February 6th, Doug got busy with work and forgot to contact Kelsey again. But on February 7th, Laura Saxton called Doug, her voice filled with worry. "Things aren't right," she said. Friends had been trying to reach Kelsey. No one had heard from her. Doug realized that Kelsey had never called him back. Laura, Doug, and Kelsey's brother drove up to her apartment in Denver. When they arrived, everything was in order. The apartment was clean. There were no bags packed, no signs of a struggle, no indication that Kelsey had planned to leave. It looked like she had stepped out with the intention of coming back. That's when they called the Denver Police Department and filed a missing persons report. Laura immediately reached out to Don DeLucas. She asked if he knew anything about Kelsey's whereabouts. Don had told her that he had seen Kelsey on the night of February 4th. They had met up around 2 or 3 in the morning, he said. She seemed fine when they parted ways. He mentioned that Kelsey might have gone to California. She had lived there briefly the year before and loved it, he explained. So maybe she went back. Laura thanked him and asked him to reach out if he heard from Kelsey. A little while later, Don had called Laura back. He said he had heard from Kelsey. She had called him from a private number. She didn't have her phone, but she said she would be getting in touch soon. But days passed and there was no word from Kelsey. No calls, no texts, no activity on her bank accounts or social media. Her phone's battery died on February 7th, and after that, there was nothing. Investigators began piecing together what had happened. They pulled Kelsey's cell phone records and discovered that on the night of February 4th, her phone had traveled to the same location in Pueblo as Dante's phone. The two phones had been in the same place at the same time. Then came a significant discovery. Surveillance footage from a Walmart in Pueblo showed Kelsey's car pulling into the parking lot around noon on February 5th, the day after she disappeared. But Kelsey wasn't driving. A male figure was behind the wheel. The car stayed in the parking lot until the morning of February 6th, when another unidentified man got into the vehicle and drove it away. On February 7th, surveillance cameras at St. Mary Corwin Hospital in Pueblo captured someone parking Kelsey's car in the hospital parking lot and walking away. The car was left there, abandoned. On February 14th, 10 days after Kelsey disappeared, police found her car at the hospital. Inside, they discovered her belongings. Her birth certificate, her passport, items she would never have left behind if she had planned to disappear on her own. And there was more evidence that pointed to Donley. Bank records showed that on the morning of February 5th, someone used Kelsey's ATM card to withdraw $400. Surveillance footage from the bank showed Donnie Lucas using the card. The Pueblo Police Department took over the investigation from Denver. Since the evidence suggested Kelsey was last seen in Pueblo, detectives focused on Dante Lucas. He was the last person known to have seen Kelsey. He had her car. He had used her ATM card. And the text messages sent from Kelsey's phone after she disappeared didn't sound like her. In the days following Kelsey's disappearance, someone continued to send messages from her phone. They told friends and family that she was sick, that she was fine, that she just needed time. But those who knew Kelsey said the messages didn't match her voice, her style, her way of speaking. On February 12th, 8 days after Kelsey vanished, Pueblo police interviewed Dante Lucas for the first time. He admitted to seeing Kelsey on the night of February 4th. He said they met up around 2 or 3 in the morning, talked for a bit, and then she left. He claimed he didn't know where she went after that. Detectives asked him about the ATM withdrawal. Dante said he couldn't remember or that he was under the influence of drugs and alcohol that night. He denied having anything to do with Kelsey's disappearance. But investigators didn't believe him. The evidence was mounting. Cell phone records showed that both Dante's and Kelsey's phones had pinged off a tower near Beulah, a rural area outside Pueblo, on the night she disappeared. Later, investigators would speculate that this might have been where Dante disposed of Kelsey's body. Still, without a body, without physical evidence of a crime, the case stalled. For years, it remained classified as a missing persons case. Kelsey's family never stopped searching. They organized community searches, They put up billboards. They offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to Kelsey's whereabouts. Laura Saxton created a Facebook page called Help Find Kelsey, which became a hub for updates and pleas for information. In 2015, frustrated by the lack of progress, Kelsey's parents filed a lawsuit against the Pueblo Police Department and the Lucas family. They alleged that the investigation had been mishandled, that police had obstructed the case. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed, but it put pressure on law enforcement to take another look at the case. In 2017, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation decided to take a fresh look at the Kelsey Shelling case. They reviewed all the evidence, conducted new interviews, and followed up on leads. And as they dug deeper, everything kept pointing back to Donna Lucas. In November 2017, Dantas was arrested on unrelated aggravated robbery charges. While he was in custody, investigators continued to build their case. Then in December 2017, nearly 5 years after Kelsey disappeared, Danta Lucas was charged with first-degree murder. The news was a bittersweet moment for Kelsey's family. Laura Saxton said she was grateful that the district attorney saw this as first-degree premeditated murder. But it wasn't Kelsey. It wasn't her daughter coming home. Over the next few years, as the case made its way through the legal system, prosecutors worked to build a case against Danta Lucas without a body, without a crime scene, without a clear cause of death. It was an uphill battle. In 2017, police conducted excavations in the backyard of a home where Donnie had lived in 2013. They dug for 2 days, searching for any sign of Kelsey. They found nothing. Investigators also explored the possibility that Kelsey's body had been disposed of in the Southside landfill in Pueblo. A retired police officer from Texas, Lee Reed, who specialized in landfill searches, was brought in to assess the situation, but without being able to trace a specific trash truck to the incident. Reed said he wouldn't have been able to accurately search the landfill. Decomposition doesn't occur in landfills, he explained, which meant that if Kelsey's body was there, it might still be preserved, but finding it would be nearly impossible without more information. The case rested on circumstantial evidence, cell phone records, surveillance footage, text messages, witness testimony. Investigators believed that Donson had strangled Kelsey after luring her to Pueblo. The theory was that he didn't want the baby, didn't want the responsibility, and saw Kelsey's pregnancy as a threat to his freedom. The lack of a murder weapon supported the strangulation theory, but there were complications. During the investigation, a woman named Roxanne Martinez came forward. She told police that Donnie had confessed to her that he killed Kelsey. Martinez was prepared to testify for the prosecution, to tell the jury what Donnie had told her. But on February 25th, 2021, just days before she was scheduled to testify, Roxanne Martinez was shot and killed in Denver. She was found lying in the street at the intersection of East Kenyon Drive and South Redash Street at 11 o'clock at night. Her death was ruled a homicide. The timing seemed suspicious. Martinez's family believed her murder was connected to the trial, but Denver police investigated and determined that her death was unrelated to the Danta Lucas case. The person responsible for Martinez's murder was never publicly identified, and her death remains a tragic and unresolved loss. Despite losing a key witness, prosecutors pressed forward. They had dozens of other witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence, and a story that, while circumstantial, painted a clear picture of what had happened. The trial of Donna Lucas began in February 2021, 8 years after Kelsey disappeared. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the courtroom had strict limits on the number of people who could attend. Jurors were spaced 6 feet apart and required to wear masks. No cameras were allowed in the building, and there was no live reporting from the courthouse. The prosecution's opening statement was direct. "This is not a missing persons case," they told the jury. "It is a homicide case." They argued that Danta Lucas had lured Kelsey to Pueblo over the course of several days because he had an interest in making sure she did not carry the baby. They said Kelsey was murdered on February 4th or in the early morning hours of February 5th. The prosecution compared Dante to a puppet master, someone who skillfully manipulated Kelsey into making the 2-hour drive despite her exhaustion and skepticism. They promised that the evidence would show cell phone records, text messages, surveillance footage, and witness testimony that all pointed to one conclusion: Dante Lucas killed Kelsey Shelling. The defense, on the other hand, called the prosecution's case the biggest reach in Pueblo's history. They argued that there was no weapon, no cause of death, no location of the murder, and no body. They said the case was built on random pieces of information accumulated over 8 years, and that none of it proved Donta killed Kelsey. The defense also suggested that Kelsey might not even be dead. They pointed to the lack of DNA evidence and questioned whether investigators had truly proven that a homicide had occurred. They even suggested alternative theories, including the possibility that Kelsey had left Pueblo to meet a drug dealer, though there was no evidence to support this claim. Over the course of 3 weeks, the prosecution called dozens of witnesses. Laura Saxton, Kelsey's mother, took the stand and spoke about her daughter's excitement over the pregnancy, her close relationship with her family, and the anguish of not knowing what happened to her. Kelsey's friends testified about the tumultuous relationship between Kelsey and Donde. They described Donde as verbally abusive, degrading, and manipulative. One friend testified that Kelsey had confided in her that Donde had been physically abusive. Investigators presented cell phone records showing that Kelsey's phone and Donta's phone were in the same location on the night she disappeared. They showed surveillance footage of Donta driving Kelsey's car and using her ATM card. They played recordings of police interviews with Donta in which his story changed and didn't line up with the timeline. A forensic expert testified about evidence found in Kelsey's car. Trace DNA belonging to Donnie was found inside a pair of gloves and 2 sweatshirts. Hair found in the car matched Kelsey's mother, meaning it could belong to Kelsey herself. Another hair matched Donnie's mother, Sarah Lucas, who admitted she had driven the car before. But there was no blood found in the car. No fingerprints that could definitively place Donu at the scene of a crime. No smoking gun. The defense hammered on this point repeatedly. How could the prosecution prove murder without physical evidence? One of the most damaging pieces of testimony came from Ryan Rivera, a former inmate who had been housed with Donta Lucas in the Pueblo County Jail. Rivera testified that Donta had told him that investigators would never find Kelsey's body. This statement was a bombshell. It suggested not only that Donta knew Kelsey was dead, but that he had disposed of her body in a way that ensured she would never be found. Another witness, Lauren Soar, testified that she had reached out to Donta in 2016, trying to gather information about Kelsey. She befriended him on social media, and they eventually met in person. During one of their conversations, Donta admitted to Lauren that he had moved Kelsey's car from Walmart to St. Mary Cordian Hospital. This was significant because Donta had previously told police he didn't know how the car ended up at the hospital. The prosecution rested their case on March 5, 2021. They had presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, weaving together cell phone records, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and Donta's own contradictory statements into a narrative of premeditated murder. On Monday, March 8th, 2021, the defense shocked everyone by resting their case without calling a single witness. They didn't present an alternative theory. They didn't put Donta Lucas on the stand. They simply rested. The decision was a gamble. The defense was betting that the prosecution hadn't met the burden of proof, that the lack of physical evidence would be enough to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. Closing arguments began. The prosecution reminded the jury of every piece of evidence they had presented. They argued that there had been plenty of time for Donnie to cover up the crime between the last time Kelsey was seen and the first time police interviewed him. They said that all the evidence pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Donnie Lucas murdered Kelsey Schelling because he didn't want her to have his baby. The defense argued that the case was the biggest stretch in Colorado's history. They said that in order to believe the prosecution's theory, you had to believe that Donta Lucas was a master criminal, someone capable of committing a perfect crime with no physical evidence. They questioned whether Kelsey was really dead, suggesting that she might have simply walked away from her life. The jury deliberated for just a few hours. Shortly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. Donta Lucas was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Kelsey Schelling. The sentence was mandatory. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was read, Laura Saxton stood outside the Pueblo County Courthouse, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm honestly kind of really still in shock right now," she said. "This has been a really long, hard road." She spoke about her daughter with tears in her eyes. The word bubbly was used by, I think, every friend of hers that got on the stand. She was very bubbly, very spirited, very soft-hearted, silly, very, very silly, funny, huge heart. She was just a tiny little thing, but she was just so full of life. I just miss everything about her. But even with the guilty verdict, Laura felt a hollow victory. We're really thankful for this outcome, she said. But in the end, we didn't get Kelsey back. And that remains true to this day. Kelsey Schelling's body has never been found. Her family continues to search for her, to hope that one day someone will come forward with information that leads them to her remains. They want to bring her home. They want to give her a proper burial. The district attorney, Jeff Chosner, said after the verdict that they were not done searching for Kelsey's remains. Laura echoed this, saying they would never give up. In February 2024, Don DeLucas appealed his conviction. He argued that the trial court improperly admitted evidence of other acts not related to Kelsey's murder, and that there was prosecutorial misconduct in closing remarks. But in a 24-page opinion, the Colorado Court of Appeals found that despite Lucas's arguments, he had received a fair trial. His conviction was upheld. Today, Don DeLucas is serving his life sentence at the Lemon Correctional Facility in Colorado. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, never eligible for parole. For Laura Saxton, the years since the trial have been a struggle. She has spoken about how the criminal justice system felt like it was designed to protect the accused, not the victims. She felt that her family was treated poorly during the trial, that their presence was seen as an inconvenience because it brought emotion into the courtroom. She spends a lot of time alone now, trying to find ways to cope. She hopes that one day she will be ready to get back into advocacy work, to push for changes in victims' rights legislation. But for now, she is simply trying to heal, to process the loss of her daughter and the long, painful journey to justice. In 2021, the community gathered in Pueblo City Park to dedicate a bench in Kelsey's honor. It stands as a reminder of a young woman whose life was cut short, whose dreams of motherhood were stolen from her, and whose memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her. And so, as we come to the end of this story, we're left with more questions than answers. Where's Kelsey Schilling? What did Don DeLucas do with her body? Will her family ever have the closure they so desperately seek? These questions may never be answered. But what we do know is this. Kelsey was loved. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was bubbly and spirited and full of life. She wanted to be a mother. She wanted a future. And though her future was taken from her, her memory endures. Justice was served, even if it took 8 long years. Don DeLucas will spend the rest of his life in prison, paying for what he did. Kelsey's family continues to search for her. They ask that anyone with information, no matter how small, come forward. If you're out hiking in the Colorado wilderness, if you're exploring abandoned areas, if you see something that doesn't seem right, please report it. Because somewhere out there, Kelsey is waiting to be brought home. Rest now. Think of Kelsey, and think of her family who never gave up. Think of Laura, who fought for 8 years to see justice done, who still fights every day to keep her daughter's memory alive. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that even in the darkest stories, there is light, there is love, there is family, and there is hope that one day, Kelsey Schilling will finally rest in peace. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. Tonight, let me share with you a story of love, obsession, and the darkest corners of the human heart. This is the story of Patrick de la Cerda, a young man whose dreams of forever were stolen in a single morning. So let me walk you through the quiet tragedy that unfolded in the Sunshine State of Florida. The year was 2017. The month was June. In the digital age, love stories often begin with a simple swipe, a click, a message sent into the void, hoping for connection. For 25-year-old Patrick de la Cerda and 29-year-old Jessica Devnani, their story began on a dating app called Plenty of Fish. Patrick was everything you'd imagine when you think of youth and promise. Born on the 4th of June, 1992 in Miami, Florida, he had grown into a handsome young man with dark hair and warm eyes that spoke of dreams yet to be fulfilled. His mother, Patricia Ronze, who had come from France, remembered how her son would light up when he spoke of the future. He wanted children. He wanted a family. He was, as his mother would say, an absolute romantic. Jessica was a bank teller in Orlando, steady and hardworking. When she met Patrick, she had recently emerged from the shadow of a difficult relationship. 8 long years with a man who had left scars. She was only beginning to understand. But Patrick was different. He was genuine, uncomplicated, full of life. Their connection was immediate, electric, undeniable. Within months, they were inseparable, traveling together, exploring new places, building the foundation of what they both believed would be a forever kind of love. By December of that year, just 6 months after they'd met, Patrick knew what he wanted. He proposed to Jessica, and she said yes. In that moment, Patrick gave her a temporary ring, a promise that something more beautiful was coming. He had already begun designing a custom engagement ring, something special, something worthy of the woman he intended to spend his life beside. Patrick's father, Max de Lacerda, watched his son fall in love and recognized something genuine. He could see it in Patrick's eyes, in the way he spoke Jessica's name. And Patricia, calling from France, heard it in her son's voice over the phone when he told her, "Mom, this one is the one." The future stretched before them like an open road. They spoke of weddings, perhaps in West Palm Beach, perhaps in France where Patrick's mother lived. They spoke of children and growing old together. They spoke of all the beautiful, ordinary things that make up a life share. But there was someone else watching their happiness unfold. Someone who could not let go. Before Patrick entered her life, Jessica had spent 8 years in the orbit of a man named Gregory Bender. Their story had begun in 2009 when Jessica was young, just 21 years old, and Gregory was 42. A successful hedge fund manager living in an affluent neighborhood in Windermere, Florida, in a house worth $750,000. Gregory was charming when he wanted to be, sophisticated, well-educated. He could make Jessica feel like she was the center of his universe. But beneath that charm lived something darker. Jealousy, possessiveness, control. Jessica would later recall how early in their relationship, when she briefly dated someone else, Gregory's true nature revealed itself. He stalked the man. He found out where the man lived. He threatened to tie him up and harm him. These weren't idle threats spoken in anger. They were delivered with a chilling calmness that made them all the more terrifying. "I never feared what he could do to me," Jessica would later say, "but I feared what he could do to other men." Still, she stayed. The pattern is familiar to anyone who has studied relationships marked by control. The push and pull, the apologies, the promises to change. A few years into their relationship, Gregory proposed, and Jessica accepted. She wore his ring and believed in the future he painted for her. But Gregory had been keeping a secret, a profound one. In 2016, Gregory underwent a medical procedure. As he recovered in the ICU, Jessica decided to surprise him with a visit. When she walked into his hospital room, she found another woman at his bedside. The moment that followed changed everything. "I'm his fiancée," Jessica said, showing her ring. The other woman looked at her and held up her own hand. "I'm his wife," she said. Her name was Damora Sanchez, and she had been married to Gregory for years. Jessica's entire relationship, her engagement, her dreams of a future, all of it had been built on a foundation of lies. Gregory tried to explain it away. He told Jessica it was merely a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement so that Damora's son could attend better schools. He promised he would divorce Damora. He begged Jessica to stay. Against her better judgment, Jessica gave him an ultimatum: get divorced, or we're done. Months passed. Gregory made excuses. The divorce never came. In 2017, Jessica finally walked away. 1 month later, she met Patrick de Lacerda. When Gregory learned through Facebook that Jessica had moved on, that she was dating someone new, something inside him cracked. Or perhaps it had always been broken. And now the mask simply fell away. He began messaging Patrick directly on Facebook. Messages were clear, threatening, designed to intimidate. He told Patrick he knew where he lived. He said he would harm them both. On voicemails left for Jessica, his voice carried a sinister certainty. I'm giving instructions, and I'm going to have my plan put into action. Jessica tried to protect herself, and Patrick from Gregory's escalating threats. She went to a judge with evidence of his harassment, text messages, voicemails, documentation of his behavior. In December 2017, the judge granted Jessica a restraining order. Gregory was forbidden from contacting her. He was ordered to surrender his extensive gun collection to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Patrick also tried to obtain a restraining order, but was denied. Still, he took precautions. Living with his father on a 9-acre property on the outskirts of Deltona, Patrick installed security cameras. He put up a proper gate at the entrance to the long, wooded driveway. There was even a sign instructing delivery drivers to call his father's cell phone before entering the property. For a few months, the harassment stopped. Gregory went silent. Jessica and Patrick allowed themselves to believe the worst was over. They focused on their wedding plans, on their future, on the life they were building together. Patrick finalized the design for Jessica's custom engagement ring and placed the order. Any day now it would arrive. Any day now he would get down on one knee again, this time with the ring he'd designed specifically for the woman he loved. But Gregory Bender had not gone away. He had simply gone underground. Because what Jessica and Patrick didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Gregory had been planning something far more permanent than harassment. He had been planning murder. While Gregory and Jessica were still together, before everything fell apart, he had been married to Daymara Sanchez. She was the woman Jessica met in that hospital room. The woman whose ring matched Jessica's. The woman whose life had been entangled with Gregory's in ways she didn't fully understand. In December 2017, as her marriage to Gregory crumbled, Daymara was moving her belongings out of their shared home. As she packed, she came across a blue spiral notebook. It was Gregory's. Curious, she began to read. What she found chilled her to the bone. The notebook contained detailed plans, maps, diagrams, timelines. It described how to approach a property, how to enter and exit without being detected, how to commit murder, and at the center of this plan was a name, Patrick de la Cerda. When Daymara confronted Gregory about what she'd found, he laughed it off. It's just fantasy, he told her. I would never actually do anything like this. Daymara wanted to believe him. Fantasy was one thing, action was another. She dropped the subject and eventually moved out, trying to rebuild her own life. 2 months later, Patrick de la Cerda was dead. And when Daymara saw the news reports of a young man murdered in Deltona, Florida, the details sounded horrifyingly familiar. The way it happened, the location, the planning, it all echoed what she'd read in Gregory's notebook. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to that Tuesday morning in February. Let me show you how carefully Gregory had prepared, how methodically he had transformed his dark fantasy into terrible reality. The morning of February 27, 2018 began like any other. For Jessica Devnani, she woke in her apartment in Orlando, exchanged good morning texts with Patrick, told him she loved him. He told her the same. She got ready for work at the bank, following the comfortable routine that structures all our lives. Patrick, 30 miles north in Deltona, woke on the property he shared with his father, Max. It was a peaceful place, 9 acres of lush Florida landscape, trees providing shade and privacy. The night before, Patrick had left Jessica a voicemail. His voice was warm, loving, ordinary, in the best way. I love you, good night, sweet dreams. In the morning I'll call you. I'll send you a text when I wake up, a little later. All right, love you, good night, bye. Neither of them knew it would be the last message she'd ever receive from him. At 6:13 that morning, while it was still dark, a vehicle left Gregory Bender's home in Windermere. Later, investigators would match this vehicle to surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera. The vehicle traveled from Orange County toward Volusia County, toward Deltona, toward Patrick's home. Inside that vehicle was Gregory Bender, 50 years old, a man who couldn't accept that Jessica had moved on. He had purchased a burner phone, a disposable cell phone that couldn't be traced back to him easily. He had loaded his weapon, a rifle chambered in .300 blackout ammunition. the kind used in AR-15 style rifles. He had studied maps of Patrick's property. He had made notes about how to approach the house without being seen, where to position himself, how to escape afterward. This was not a crime of passion, not a moment of rage that spiraled out of control. This was premeditated murder, planned over months, rehearsed in his mind until it became as familiar as any other routine. Around 7:15 in the morning, Max de la Cerda received a phone call. He was 70 miles away at a construction site where he worked. The caller identified himself as a delivery driver. There was a package for Patrick, the man said. Could Max help arrange the delivery? Max tried calling his son but got no answer. He tried texting, still nothing. This wasn't entirely unusual. Patrick might have been asleep or in the shower, but something about the call felt off. The delivery driver had refused to leave a callback number, and the timing was strange. Package deliveries didn't usually happen this early in the morning. Max called Jessica. She was at work by now, and when Max told her he couldn't reach Patrick, that same unease settled over her. She tried calling Patrick herself. Her calls went to voicemail, and then her phone rang. The caller ID showed Gregory Bender's number. Jessica's blood ran cold. She hadn't heard from Gregory in months. Not since the restraining order had been issued. And now, on a random Tuesday morning, he was calling her twice. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Every instinct told her something was wrong. She left work immediately, getting into her car and driving as fast as she could toward Deltona, toward Patrick's house, toward the man she loved. As she drove, her mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Max's girlfriend, Shannon Chamberlain, who owned the property where Patrick and Max lived, also received word that something might be wrong. She was closer than Max, so she headed to the house to check on Patrick. Shannon arrived first. What she found would haunt her forever. The front door was open. Glass was scattered across the porch. And there, just inside the doorway, lay Patrick de la Cerda, 25 years old, the young man with his whole life ahead of him. He had been shot 4 times in the head, face, chest, and hip. He was already gone, his body growing cold. When Jessica pulled up minutes later, she saw the crime scene tape, the police vehicles, Shannon's stricken face. Before anyone could stop her, she saw Patrick, the man she loved, the man she was supposed to marry, the man who had designed a custom engagement ring that would now arrive too late. Her screams echoed across the 9-acre property, across the quiet Florida morning, across the chasm that separates before and after. Detective Chad Weaver of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office took charge of the crime scene. The property was vast, the location rural, and the killer could still be nearby. Deputies moved through the property with weapons drawn, clearing each building, each corner where someone might hide. But the killer was gone. As Weaver surveyed the scene, certain details began to tell a story. Patrick had been shot as he came to his front door ambushed. The killer had been lying in wait, positioned where he could shoot without being seen until it was too late. 4 shots, 4 hits. This was someone who knew what they were doing. Shell casings were recovered from the scene. The ammunition was .300 blackout, powerful, accurate. Used in tactical rifles, not the kind of thing you'd find in your average home. This suggested someone with weapons knowledge, someone comfortable with firearms. The surveillance DVR was missing. The killer had taken it, along with Patrick's computer. He didn't want to be identified. He had thought about evidence, about what could tie him to this scene. As Weaver interviewed Jessica and Max at the sheriff's office, a picture began to emerge. Patrick had one known enemy, a neighbor with whom he'd had a dispute months earlier, an incident that had even involved shots fired. But when Weaver checked, he found the neighbor had an airtight alibi. He was in jail when Patrick was killed. Then Jessica told Weaver about Gregory Bender. She explained their history, the 8 years she'd spent with him, the jealousy, the possessiveness, the threats. She showed Weaver the restraining order. She played voicemails where Gregory's voice dripped with barely concealed malice. And she told him about the phone calls that morning, 2 of them from Gregory breaking his silence for the first time in months, right around the time Patrick was murdered. Weaver knew immediately he had his prime suspect. But knowing and proving are 2 different things, and at this point there was no physical evidence linking Gregory Bender to the murder scene. That evening, police arrested Gregory Bender, but not for murder. They arrested him for violating the restraining order by calling Jessica. It was a minor charge, but it bought them time. As Gregory sat in the Orange County Jail, Detective Weaver received a phone call that would break the case wide open. Damara Sanchez watched the news coverage of Patrick de la Cerda's murder, and her heart sank. She knew. Somehow, deep in her bones, she knew. The details matched too closely to what she'd read in Gregory's notebook months earlier. The location, the planning, the execution. It was exactly the kind of methodical approach Gregory would take. The fantasy he'd dismissed so casually had become horrible reality. Damara contacted Detective Weaver through her attorney. She was nervous, frightened even, when they met in a secluded parking lot on February 28, the day after Patrick's murder. But she was also determined to tell the truth. She described the blue spiral notebook she'd found. She described the maps of Patrick's property, the notes about how to approach the house, how to escape without detection, how to eliminate evidence. She described confronting Gregory about it and his casual dismissal. It's just fantasy. Weaver listened, his pulse quickening. This was exactly the probable cause he needed to search Gregory Bender's home. The search warrant was executed that same day, February 28. Weaver and his team entered the 5-bedroom house in Windermere, not knowing exactly what they'd find, hoping for something, anything that would tie Gregory to Patrick's murder. What they found exceeded their wildest expectations. In Gregory's home office, sitting at the top of a trash bin, not buried deep, not burned, not destroyed, but simply crumpled up and tossed aside, were several pieces of paper covered in handwriting. Gregory's handwriting. Detective Weaver stood there staring into that trash can, barely able to believe what he was seeing. "I was in shock," he would later recall. "There's no way we just found this murder plan." But they had. The papers contained everything. Patrick's address, detailed sketches of his property, notes on his routine, diagrams of the house layout, information about Patrick's pet, instructions on how to enter and exit without being detected, reminders to dispose of clothes, gloves, plates, tracking devices, everything except the one thing Gregory had forgotten: the plan itself. He had accounted for nearly every piece of evidence, every way he might be caught, but in that final cleanup, he had failed to destroy the very document that would convict him. The search also uncovered 300 blackout ammunition, the same type used to kill Patrick. A shell casing found in a drawer matched perfectly with casings recovered from the crime scene. Ballistics testing would later confirm that all the bullets were fired from the same weapon. Police also recovered Gregory's burner phone. Cell phone records showed it had remained at his house for weeks, powered off until the morning of February 27. That morning it traveled from Windermere to Deltona, placing Gregory at the scene of Patrick's murder. The burner phone had made exactly 2 calls, one to Gregory's personal phone and one to Max de la Cerda, the fake delivery driver call that lured Patrick to his front door. The evidence was circumstantial, yes. There was no murder weapon recovered, no DNA, no eyewitness placing Gregory at the scene. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, a web of facts that all pointed in one direction. Less than 48 hours after Patrick's murder, Gregory Bender was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. Justice moves slowly. Patrick died in February 2018. Gregory Bender's trial didn't begin until May 2021, more than 3 years later. For Jessica, those years were a blur of grief and waiting. Patrick's family presented her with the engagement ring he'd designed for her during her 30th birthday celebration. 2 months after his death, she wore it constantly, not as a symbol of what was, but as a reminder of what should have been. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Ashley Terwilliger and Andrew Urbanek, presented their case methodically. They called Jessica to testify. She was the star witness, describing Gregory's possessiveness, his threats, his inability to let her go. She read text to the jury where Gregory had threatened Patrick. She played voicemails where his voice carried that chilling certainty. She explained the phone calls on the morning of the murder, how she knew immediately something was wrong. The defense tried to undermine Jessica's credibility. Gregory's attorney, Richard Parker, presented secretly recorded videos from November 2017 footage. Gregory had paid a private investigator to capture. The videos showed Jessica and Gregory at restaurants, having lunch, having dinner, Gregory touching her hand, kissing her head. Why, the defense asked. Would Jessica be dining with Gregory if she was happily moving on with Patrick? Jessica explained. Gregory had told her he was upset, that he needed closure, that if she agreed to meet with him, he would leave them alone. She went because she was afraid of what he might do if she didn't. She went to try to calm him down, to protect Patrick. The defense argued that everything in Gregory's notebook was just fantasy, that people shouldn't be convicted for their worst thoughts simply because they wrote them down. This case is about the difference between a fantasy and reality, Parker told the jury. But the prosecution countered with the cell phone evidence placing Gregory near the crime scene, with the burner phone that only ever called 2 numbers, with the matching ammunition, with the detailed plan that corresponded exactly to how Patrick was killed. Dame Maura testified about finding the notebook, about Gregory's dismissive response when she confronted him. Detective Weaver testified about the investigation, about finding the crumpled papers in the trash bin, about how every element of the written plan matched the actual murder. On May 28, 2021, after deliberating for approximately 2 hours, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. There was no question of sentencing. In Florida, first-degree murder carries an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jessica sat in the courtroom and watched as the verdict was read. She wore Patrick's engagement ring. She watched Gregory's face as he learned he would die in prison. "We finally did it," she said afterward. "We got the guilty verdict." Patrick's father, Max, gave a victim impact statement, looking Gregory in the eye. Max had not only lost his son, but had been put through the additional agony of being briefly considered a suspect himself during the investigation and trial. Patricia, calling from France, finally had some measure of justice for her boy, the romantic who had wanted nothing more than to build a life with the woman he loved. Gregory Bender's attorneys filed an appeal, arguing that the search of his home had been illegal, but the conviction was upheld. He remains in prison today, with no hope of release. For Jessica, life continues, though it's a life fundamentally altered. She has spoken publicly about her experience, appearing on 48 Hours and other true crime programs. She continues to wear Patrick's engagement ring.
"Patrick will always be the love of my life," she says. "I wear it because I will go on for Patrick. I will live in his happy memories close to my heart."
The case raised important questions about the efficacy of restraining orders. Gregory had been ordered to surrender his firearms when the restraining order was issued in December 2017. He never did, and without probable cause for a search warrant, law enforcement had no authority to seize those weapons. If they had, Patrick might still be alive. Jessica and Patrick's family have expressed anger and frustration about this failure. "It failed us," Jessica told reporters. "It failed Patrick." The story of Patrick de la Cerda is a reminder that some people cannot accept when a relationship ends. An obsession can calcify into something monstrous. That jealousy unchecked can become murderous rage. It's a reminder that restraining orders are only as good as their enforcement. That threats should always be taken seriously. That love can sometimes make us vulnerable to people who should never have had access to our hearts. And so we come to the end of Patrick's story. A story that should have had decades more chapters, that should have included wedding vows and children's laughter and growing old together. Instead, it ended on a Tuesday morning in February, with a young man answering his door, expecting a symbol of love, meeting instead the bullet that would end his life. Patrick de la Cerda was 25 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He was kind, romantic, optimistic, full of dreams. His mother remembers him as someone who loved deeply, who wanted a family, who approached life with hope and joy. His death was not random. It was not an accident. It was the culmination of one man's inability to let go, one man's transformation of love into possession, possession into obsession, obsession into murder. Gregory Bender will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that's cold comfort to those who loved Patrick. No sentence can bring him back. No verdict can restore what was taken. Jessica continues on, living for both of them now, carrying Patrick's memory with her, wearing his ring as a promise that he will never be forgotten. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between sleep and waking, perhaps Patrick's spirit rests easier, knowing that justice was served, knowing that the man who took his life will never take another. Sleep now, dear listener. Let this story settle into your mind as you drift away. Remember that most people are good. that most love stories have happy endings, that most of us will live out our days in peace. But remember, too, to trust your instincts, to take threats seriously, to understand that some people, when faced with loss, choose violence instead of healing. Remember Patrick de Lacerda, who deserved so much more time than he was given? Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight, let me tell you a story that unfolded beneath the California sun, in a place where healing and hope once lived. This is a tale of ambition twisted into darkness, of trust betrayed in the most unthinkable way. So as we settle in, listen as I guide you through the tragic story of the Han family. In the hills above Santa Barbara, where avocado groves stretched toward the Pacific and the Mediterranean sun painted everything gold, there lived a man named Weidong Hen, though most knew him simply as Henry. Henry Hen was born on October 6, 1958, in Beijing, China, into a family where medicine was not just a profession, but a calling passed down through generations. His grandfather had been an herbalist, his mother an ontological gynecologist, his father a dermatologist. From his earliest memories, Henry was surrounded by the art of healing, the ancient wisdom of Chinese medicine blending seamlessly with modern medical science. But Henry's childhood was not an easy one. When he was just 8 years old, the Cultural Revolution swept through China like a storm. He was separated from his parents and sister, sent away during those turbulent years when schools were closed and normalcy seemed a distant dream. Unable to attend formal classes, young Henry taught himself, his mind hungry for knowledge even in the darkest times. When the Cultural Revolution finally ended in 1976 with the death of Chairman Mao, Henry's dedication bore fruit. He was admitted to the prestigious Beijing University of Chinese Medicine and Western Medicine, an institution as revered in China as Harvard is in America. In 1982, he graduated at the top of his class with dual degrees, a Doctor of Oriental Medicine and a Medical Doctor of China. He completed his residency at Beijing Dongjiamen Hospital, one of the primary institutions specializing in the integration of Eastern and Western medicine. But Henry's intellectual curiosity reached beyond herbs and needles. He was fascinated by the human mind, by the invisible connections between body and spirit. In 1985, Henry received one of only 2 government scholarships to study psychology at the graduate level in the United States. It was an extraordinary honor, a chance to explore cognitive science at the University of California. Henry arrived in America with dreams of research, of unlocking the mysteries of the brain. But then came Tiananmen Square. In 1989, when students gathered in Beijing's Central Square demanding democratic reforms, Henry signed a petition criticizing the Chinese government's harsh response. It was an act of conscience, of solidarity with young people seeking freedom, but the consequences were swift and severe. The Chinese government revoked his scholarship. They forbade him from returning to China. Overnight, Henry became a castaway, stranded in a country where his Chinese medical credentials meant nothing, where his English was still halting and uncertain. For years, Henry labored in Los Angeles and Santa Barbara, applying what medical knowledge he could to the care of elderly and impaired people. The work was humble, far from the research laboratories he had once dreamed of. But Henry never lost his belief in the power of healing. Around 30 years before that terrible March night, Henry found his way to Santa Barbara and discovered the Santa Barbara Herb Clinic. The clinic had been founded by Jean Yu, a celebrated herbal practitioner. Under her guidance, Henry began to practice again, to remember who he was meant to be. In 1991, Jean Yu sold him the clinic. She moved to San Luis Obispo to start another practice, and Henry took the reins of what would become his life's work. The clinic started in the Libero building in downtown Santa Barbara, then moved to Upper State Street, behind Chuck's Steakhouse. It was a modest space, but what happened within those walls was nothing short of remarkable. Henry treated roughly 13,000 people over the next 25 years. He saw 15 patients a day, 4 days a week, no matter what. He combined the ancient wisdom of Chinese herbal medicine with modern Western medical understanding. He used acupuncture, acupressure, and carefully crafted herbal formulas from an on-site Chinese pharmacy. His patients came to him when Western medicine had failed them. They came with cancer, osteoporosis, hepatitis, conditions that seemed hopeless. One of his first patients was Steve Carlson, a university administrator suffering from hepatitis A. His regular physician had told him nothing could be done, that he simply had to wait it out. But Henry saw him differently. Within a week of treatment, Steve noticed results. Within 2 weeks, his symptoms had almost entirely disappeared. Word spread. People spoke of Henry Hahn as a miracle worker, though he would never have called himself that. He was quietly charismatic, brilliant but humble, a man who believed in treating not just the body but the whole person, mind and spirit together. He wrote books sharing his knowledge. Ancient herbs. Modern medicine became widely read in alternative medicine communities. He co-authored another work called Healing Our Planet, Healing Ourselves, exploring the power of internal change to transform the external world. He was working on a third book for Random House, about integrating Chinese and Western medicine, when his life was cut short. But Henry's life was not all work. On the personal front, after an early marriage ended in separation, he opened his heart again. He met He Jae-yu, known to friends as Jenny. She was born on November 22nd, 1986. Vivacious and wise beyond her years with a hot sense of style and sharp business mind. Jenny had worked as a server at several Asian restaurants in Santa Barbara County, including the Saigon Noodle House, often bringing along the light of her life, their daughter Emily, born on March 26, 2010. Emily was strong and beautiful like her mother, with a joyful personality and a courageous spirit. She attended preschool at the Waldorf School, where her teacher remembered her love of playing, of serving delicious sand cupcakes during outdoor playtime. By the time she was 5, Emily had just started kindergarten at Foothill Elementary School. The Han family lived together at 4640 Green Hill Way in Goleta, on a 7-acre avocado ranch. Their Mediterranean-style home sat high on a hillside, not visible from the main road below, surrounded by large gardens. It was a sanctuary, a place where healing and hope resided. Henry's parents had also moved to the United States by then, living with the family. But in 2015, tragedy struck the Han household. Henry lost both his parents within weeks of each other. The grief was immense. But Henry continued his work, continued treating his patients, continued being the healer that so many depended upon. By early 2016, life seemed to be moving forward. Emily was thriving in kindergarten. Jenny helped run the clinic's front office with an entrepreneurial mindset, dreaming of one day opening a little dim sum restaurant. Henry was researching new treatments, particularly interested in cannabinoid compounds and their potential to fight cancer. He believed he was on the brink of a breakthrough, and that's when Pierre Hopsch entered their lives. Pierre Romain Hopsch was born in the United States and raised primarily in Southern California. His background was unconventional, enigmatic, shrouded in claims that were difficult to verify. His father, Frederick Haros, also known as Frederick Smith, was Jordanian-born and claimed ties to the CIA during the late 1980s and early 1990s. Frederick had reportedly founded an oil company called Caltech International Inc., though it later dissolved. He lived a reclusive life in Oceanside, California, renting rooms in a modest home, a far cry from the wealth and intrigue his story suggested. Pierre had a half-sister, Nadine Jolie Courtney, a beauty blogger and author who appeared on the Bravo reality show Newlyweds the first year. She described their upbringing as Middle Eastern and Circassian in heritage. Their mother, Nancy Berchtold Halpius, had died of cancer in 2008. Pierre was 27 years old in March of 2016, living with his father in that small apartment in Oceanside. He had no criminal history. On paper, he was a blank slate. But Pierre Hopsch was a man consumed by a singular obsession: wealth. His entire life's drive, according to those who knew him, was being rich. Not comfortable. Not successful. Rich. Extraordinarily, impossibly rich. He sent screenshots to various people showing Chase bank accounts with balances ranging from $3 million all the way up to $940 million. He presented himself as a jet-setting billionaire, a chemist and technical expert, an entrepreneur on the verge of revolutionary breakthroughs. He claimed to have created a perpetual energy machine, a device that could generate power indefinitely without input. He told people he had been diagnosed with an incurable cancer and had cured himself through his own research, performing cell studies in his home laboratory. He described encounters with federal operatives, meetings with Department of Energy officials, shadowy figures who were both threatening and offering him untold riches for his inventions. The truth was far more mundane. Pierre used a simple HTML editing trick, the same method teenagers use to change their grades before showing report cards to their parents. He would alter the text on a bank's website to show whatever numbers he wanted, then screenshot it. The bank accounts were fake. The wealth was an illusion, but the stories served a purpose. They made Pierre seem important, connected, valuable. They opened doors that would otherwise remain closed. One of those doors led to Dr. Henry Hahn. Exactly how Pierre and Henry met remains somewhat unclear. What is known is that by early 2016, they were discussing a business venture. Pierre had convinced Henry that he possessed expertise in cannabis chemistry, that he could help synthesize CBD-rich compounds for Henry's research into alternative cancer treatments. They formed a company called Molecular Scientific LLC, later renamed Obsidian Teradyne LLC. The prospectus listed Pierre as a chemist and manufacturing specialist. It listed Henry as herbalist and clinician. Their vision involved stem cell skin cream and cannabinoid-based cancer cures. Through this venture, Pierre met others in Henry's circle, including a man named Thomas Davida, known as TJ. TJ was a marijuana grower from Thousand Oaks, who had also been discussing supplying CBD-rich strains to Henry. TJ described Pierre as that awkward kid who wanted to fit in, a rough-around-the-edges guy with a penchant for grandiose stories. On Monday, March 21st, 2016, Pierre walked into the Santa Barbara Herb Clinic. He bypassed the front desk in a brusque manner and said, "Henry knows who I am." He returned on Tuesday, March 22nd. That same day, Pierre and Henry signed documents for Obsidian Teradyne LLC. They were business partners now, at least on paper. Henry had no way of knowing that Pierre had already installed spyware on his computer. He had no way of knowing that Pierre had gained access to his bank account information, his social security number, his passwords and verification codes. Henry Hahn was last seen alive at 10 p.m. on March 22, 2016. March 23, 2016, dawned like any other day in Santa Barbara. The sun rose over the Pacific. The avocado trees swayed in the coastal breeze. But Henry Hahn did not arrive at his business meeting that morning. This was highly unusual. Henry was meticulous, reliable, someone who kept his commitments no matter what. When he couldn't be reached by phone, his colleagues grew concerned. Two of Henry's business associates, Ron Goldberg among them, drove to the Hahn residence around midday. When they arrived at the secluded property on Green Hill Way, they noticed something immediately wrong. The front door was ajar. The family's cars were still parked outside. The house was quiet, too quiet, with an eerie stillness that made their hearts race. They called the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department and requested a welfare check. Deputies arrived and entered the home cautiously. Everything seemed normal at first. No signs of forced entry, no obvious disturbance. But when they reached the garage, they discovered a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. 3 bodies lay there, wrapped in plastic sheeting and bound with duct tape. 57-year-old Dr. Henry Hahn, 29-year-old Jenny Hahn, 5-year-old Emily Hahn, just days away from her 6th birthday. Each had been shot multiple times. Henry and Jenny had each taken 3 bullets to the head. Emily, the kindergartner who loved making sand cupcakes and drawing pictures for her mother, had been shot 8 times. 8 bullets into the skull of a 5-year-old child. The brutality was incomprehensible. Sheriff Bill Brown, a man who had seen countless crime scenes in his career, would later describe it as one of the most odious cases he had ever encountered. By 11:30 p.m. that evening, sheriff's detectives had launched a suspicious death investigation. Forensics teams and Department of Justice criminalists descended on the property. Neighbors in the nearby Forte Ranch condominium community watched as 2 squad cars became 11, winding up the Hahn's driveway throughout the night. The investigation moved swiftly. Detectives began piecing together Henry's final days, his business dealings, his recent contacts. Within 36 hours, they developed leads that pointed to Pierre Hauptsch. On the morning of March 23rd, just hours after the murders, Pierre Hauptsch sent an urgent text message to his acquaintance TJ Direda. "I need your help with something urgently." Like it's urgent. TJ was at his home in Thousand Oaks when the message arrived at 9:39 a.m. He didn't respond immediately, but about an hour later Pierre showed up at his house. They talked in the backyard, and Pierre's first words, according to TJ, were chilling. "Just so you know, I'm a monster." Pierre then confessed that he had killed Dr. Henry Hahn, his wife, and his child. He needed help moving the bodies. Specifically, he needed help with Henry's body, which was too heavy for him to move alone. He had tried to fit all 3 bodies in his car, he explained, but they wouldn't all fit. TJ testified later that he didn't believe Pierre at first. Pierre was known for telling elaborate stories, for exaggerating and seeking attention. This had to be another one of his fantasies. "I didn't believe him initially," TJ said. But Pierre provided details, specific details about how the bodies were positioned, about the plastic sheeting and duct tape, about the weight and logistics of moving them, details that, as prosecutors would later argue, only the killer would know. TJ told Pierre he would see what he could do, that he'd try to help, but he didn't want to go to Santa Barbara. He wanted Pierre to leave. Once Pierre was gone, TJ tried to reach Dr. Hahn. He called around, trying to get information, trying to confirm whether this horrifying confession was real or just another one of Pierre's delusions. He couldn't reach anyone. The situation felt chaotic, scary, confusing. Pierre kept texting him throughout the day, asking for updates. At 5 p.m., when TJ still hadn't provided assistance, Pierre sent another message suggesting they go to Las Vegas together. He would pay for everything. Then, around 7:35 p.m., Pierre sent the text that would become crucial evidence. "Yep, I'm screwed. They just found everything. My life's over. Only if I got to it all sooner." Like this morning, TJ's mother called him. The moment it hit the news, the Hahn family had been found murdered. It was true. All of it was true. TJ contacted his brother, who was a judge and former district attorney. They agreed it was important to report what Pierre had told him. In the early morning hours of March 25th, TJ called the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department. Meanwhile, investigators had been conducting their own work. They found a Trader Joe's shopping bag at the crime scene, containing business partnership documents for Obsidian Teradyne LLC, signed and dated by Henry Hahn and Pierre Hauptsch on March 22nd, just one day before the murders. They traced Pierre's vehicle, a burgundy Lexus, and learned he lived with his father in Oceanside, San Diego County. Police set up a stakeout outside the residence, but Pierre was nowhere to be found. Then, on March 25th, surveillance teams watched as Pierre's father, Frederick, drove to a nearby Walmart and discreetly exchanged a bag with his son. Police moved in immediately, arresting both men at gunpoint at a gas station east of Oceanside. Frederick was later released without charges, but when officers searched Pierre's car, they found a cache of damning evidence. A loaded 9mm handgun, a .22 caliber Ruger pistol with a threaded barrel which would later be confirmed as the murder weapon, a homemade suppressor, .22 caliber ammunition matching what was found in the victims' bodies, Dr. Hahn's iPhone and Jenny's iPhone, both wrapped in aluminum foil to block signals, Dr. Hahn's iPad, also wrapped in foil, Dr. Hahn's wallet and credit card, receipts for duct tape and plastic wrap, purchased before the killings from a Home Depot in Oceanside. Surveillance footage would later show Pierre at that Home Depot buying the exact materials used to wrap the bodies. Pierre's fingerprints would be found on both the plastic sheeting and the duct tape, and then there was his electronic trail. If the physical evidence was damning, Pierre Hauptsch's web history was a window directly into his mind. A step-by-step chronicle of planning, execution, and aftermath. Days before the murders, Pierre had purchased the Ruger pistol at a gun store in Arizona, which surveillance footage and receipts confirmed. He researched on his laptop how to fabricate a handgun suppressor, watching instructional videos on March 22nd. He installed spyware on his own laptop first, practicing the process, then installed the same software on Henry Hahn's home computer days before the murders. Spyware allowed him to capture every keystroke, every password, every bank account detail. He created a fake email address designed to receive verification codes that were meant for Henry. The day after the murders, on March 24th, location data showed Pierre at a McDonald's parking lot in Thousand Oaks. There, according to investigators, he used his laptop to gain access to Henry's Chase and Wells Fargo bank accounts. He attempted multiple times to transfer money. He tried to move $72,000. Eventually, he succeeded in transferring $5,000 into his own accounts. A check of his phone showed evidence of a $100,000 transfer from Han's account to his own. His search history after the murders revealed his panic, his desperate attempts to evade detection. How good are fingerprint forensics? How long does crime scene analysis take? Is a car searched entering Tijuana? How long do fingerprints last on plastic sheeting? How to disable GPS tracking? And then perhaps most haunting of all, there was his chat with an online psychic. The psychic called himself Count Marco, a master of cartomancy who charged $3.95 per minute. The user, identifying himself as Pierre, typed out messages that the computer spyware captured keystroke by keystroke. "I have done bad things," Pierre typed. Then he paused, deleted the message, thought better of such a direct admission. Instead, he sensed, "I have made bad choices." He asked the psychic, "Will I get caught for what I did?" Pierre Halbost was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances: premeditation, lying in wait, multiple murders, and murder for financial gain. The Santa Barbara District Attorney's Office initially announced plans to seek the death penalty, but prior to trial, the parties reached an agreement. The prosecution would withdraw the request for the death penalty. In exchange, Pierre agreed to a bench trial, meaning his fate would be decided by a judge alone rather than a jury. The trial began in October of 2021, more than 5.5 years after the murders. Judge Brian Hill presided over the proceedings in Department 2 of Santa Barbara Superior Court. Prosecutors Hilary Dozer and Benjamin Ladini presented what they call the mountain of evidence. They showed surveillance footage of Pierre buying the plastic sheeting and duct tape at Home Depot. They showed receipts matching the materials to the crime scene. They presented cell phone records and GPS data placing Pierre in the area of the Han residence on the night of the murders. They called forensics experts who matched the bullets found in the victims' bodies to the Ruger pistol found in Pierre's car. They showed the jury Pierre's web history, the searches about forensics and border crossings, the chat with the psychic. They presented financial records showing the attempted transfers from Henry's accounts. TJ Dieter took the stand and recounted Pierre's confession. The texts, the panic, the evidence was overwhelming. As prosecutor Ben Ladidig said, this case was over within the first 72 hours. But Pierre Habsch's defense team, Christine Voss and Michael Hanley from the Public Defender's Office, fought back as best they could. They questioned the reliability of the GPS data, pointing out inconsistencies that seemed to show Pierre in 2 places at once. In Oceanside 1 minute and Santa Barbara 2 minutes later. The prosecution countered that these inconsistencies were due to the overlapping ranges of cell towers. They challenged the methodology of ballistics matching, calling an expert witness, Dr. Brent Turvey, who testified that there was no empirical scientific way to truly prove a bullet was fired from a specific gun. They attacked TJ DeRedder's credibility, questioning why he waited nearly 2 days to contact authorities and suggesting he could have learned details about the crime scene from other sources, particularly from Ron Goldberg, who had been at the house when deputies first discovered the bodies. And then in a decision that stunned observers, Pierre Hall Paps took the stand in his own defense. Over 3 days of testimony, Pierre told a story that seemed to come straight from a spy thriller. He claimed he had been framed for the murders. He said the killings were carried out by a third party connected to the Department of Energy. He spoke of secret operatives, of shadowy figures who were after his perpetual energy machine technology. He testified that he had created a device that could generate infinite power, and he had attracted the attention of federal agencies and foreign governments. He said he had self-diagnosed an incurable cancer and cured himself through his own research. He insisted that the evidence found in his car had been planted, that the web history had been manipulated, that he was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. When pressed by prosecutor Ben Ladidig about his history of deception, Pierre was evasive. Some lies he remembered in great detail. Others he claimed could not possibly have come from him. When confronted with the fake bank account screenshots, he insisted they were real. that he actually had accounts set up by the Department of Energy. So your testimony is that you cured cancer and created a free energy machine. Letting asked at one point. Pierre hesitated, but essentially confirmed this was his claim. Letting projected autopsy photos of the three victims onto the courtroom screen. Pierre shuddered and refused to look, turning his head away from the images of what had been done to Henry, Jenny, and 5-year-old Emily. In his closing statement, Letting called Pierre a lying liar who lies about lying. He said the notion of a frame job was so far outside the realm of possibility that no human being with any semblance of common sense would believe it. On November 24, 2021, the day before Thanksgiving, Judge Brian Hill rendered his verdict. Guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. All special circumstances and enhancements were found to be true. Pierre Hobbs showed no emotion as the verdict was read. On January 24, 2022, Pierre Hobbs was brought before Judge Hill for sentencing. He had dismissed his defense attorney and chose to represent himself, still insisting he had been wrongly convicted, demanding a new trial. Judge Hill explained that such motions could only be made after sentencing, not instead of it. Friends and business associates of Dr. Henry Hand spoke during the hearing. They described the loss the suffering patients left without their healer. The community forever changed by this senseless brutality. Pierre spoke as well, still claiming he wasn't responsible for the murders, still denying any involvement, even as he acknowledged that Henry had been a good person. Judge Hill sentenced Pierre Hobbs to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. An additional 75 years to life was added for the enhancement of using a gun to inflict death. Pierre would never leave prison. He would grow old behind bars, if he lived long enough. In October of 2025, Pierre filed a petition requesting a new hearing and trial. His request was denied. Today, Pierre Hobbs is 35 years old. He is incarcerated at Kern Valley State Prison in Delano, California, high-security facility where he will spend the rest of his days. The Santa Barbara community was devastated by the loss of the Hahn family. Flowers and notes piled up outside the Santa Barbara Herb Clinic, creating a shrine-like atmosphere. People walked in silence to pay their respects, to mourn the loss of a healer who had touched so many lives. The Santa Barbara County Psychological Association created a list of therapists offering free or reduced cost sessions for anyone affected by the murders. Emily's kindergarten classmates and their parents were offered counseling. Her teacher from the Waldorf school lit a candle in her honor, remembering the joyful little girl who loved to serve sand cupcakes. Jenny's friends spoke of her wit and wisdom, her entrepreneurial spirit, her dreams of opening a dim sum restaurant. And Henry's patients, nearly 200 of them, suddenly without their doctor, shared stories of healing and hope. They spoke of a man who treated not just their bodies but their spirits, who believed in the integration of Eastern and Western medicine, who spent long nights researching new strategies to help people find comfort. Steve Carlson, that early hepatitis patient whose life Henry had changed, spoke for many when he said, "Every one of us has exactly the same story. I tried everything. Nothing worked. I found Henry. I was good after that." The Santa Barbara Herb Clinic closed after the murders. For over a year, it seemed it might close forever, another casualty of Pierre Hobbs' greed and violence. But in April of 2017, a Vietnamese practitioner named Tram Pham reopened the clinic at a new location on State Street. Patient files were transferred according to confidentiality rules. The herbs, the treatments, the dedication to holistic healing continued. Tram ran the clinic for 4 years before selling it to Dr. Mariko Hori in October of 2021. The clinic continues to this day, carrying on Henry Hand's legacy of treating the whole body and helping it heal itself. Henry's books remain in print, his wisdom still accessible to those seeking an alternative path to health. But nothing can bring back the family that was lost that terrible March night. Nothing can restore Emily's 6th birthday party, her future, her drawings for her mother. Nothing can bring back Jenny's laughter, her grace, her dreams. Nothing can return Henry to the patients who needed him, the community that loved him, the world that was better for his presence. In the end, Pierre Hobbs' quest for wealth led him not to riches but to ruin. His lies and deceptions, his fake bank accounts and elaborate stories, all culminated in the most heinous act imaginable. The murder of 3 innocent people, including a child as they slept in their own home. For what? For access to bank accounts that, even if he had successfully drained them, would never have contained the hundreds of millions he fantasized about. For a delusion of wealth that was as fake as his screenshots, as empty as his perpetual energy machine, he destroyed a family. He devastated a community. He ended 3 lives and ruined his own. All for an illusion. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. Tonight we're going to journey through a story that's both tragic and deeply human. A story about love that turned to darkness. About a woman who devoted her life to caring for others. And about the fragile boundaries between hope and despair. This is the story of Patricia Burns. Lake Luzerne is the kind of place people dream about when they imagine escaping the chaos of city life. Nestled in upstate New York, it's a small, peaceful town where summer brings campers to the pristine waters and thick forests. The kind of place where neighbors know each other's names, where children ride their bikes down quiet streets, and where the sound of crickets fills warm evenings. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a fresh start. For Patricia Burns, it represented hope. After years of turmoil, she'd moved to Lake Luzerne, seeking peace. She rented a modest second-floor apartment on Lake Avenue, a quiet street where you could hear the wind moving through the trees. It was small, but it was hers, a place where she could rebuild her life, where she could finally breathe. Patricia was 42 years old in the winter of 2013. Those who knew her described her as a fireball of energy, someone who moved through life with purpose and passion. She had worked for years as a nurse's aide, most recently with community hospice in Saratoga County. It was demanding work, the kind that required not just skill but genuine compassion. Patricia sat with people in their final days. She held their hands. She brought comfort when there was little left to give. Her coworkers remembered her as outstanding. Someone who treated every patient with dignity, who never rushed, who understood that these moments mattered more than anything else. One woman, whose husband had been under Patricia's care, would later say that Patricia brought light into his final days, that she made an unbearable time somehow bearable. But Patricia's gift for caring for others didn't extend to her own life quite as easily. She had a complicated history with men. Relationships that started with promise but ended in pain. She was a mother to 5 children, though by 2013 one of them was gone. Her daughter Crystalline had died 3 years earlier. Just 15 years old. She'd gone to sleep one December night in 2010 and never woke up. There were no drugs, no alcohol, nothing that explained it. Just a beautiful, perfect teenage girl who slipped away in the night. The kind of tragedy that leaves a permanent hollow space in a family. Patricia's surviving children were her world. There was Nicholas, her oldest, Megan Jenkins, 22, strong-willed and protective. And then there were her 2 youngest daughters with Clifford Burns, Harley, 15, and Autumn, 14. 2 girls who were about to have their childhood shattered beyond repair. Patricia first met Clifford Burns in the most ordinary way. She was working at a Dunkin' Donuts, one of those drive-through windows where you hand coffee to strangers and exchange brief pleasantries. Clifford became a regular. Day after day, he'd pull up in his vehicle, order his coffee, and linger just a moment longer than necessary to talk to Patricia. Eventually, he asked for her number. She gave it to him. At first, Clifford seemed like exactly what Patricia needed. He was a businessman who ran his own tree service company. He seemed stable, financially secure. He was an avid fisherman who loved the New York Mets with a passion that bordered on obsession. He had a custom motorcycle and a sense of adventure. They married in 1997, blending their families together. For a while, there were moments of genuine happiness. Trips to Times Square, motorcycle rides on sunny afternoons, family photos filled with smiles, 2 daughters, Harley and Autumn, who seemed like they might grow up in a stable, loving home. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. Very wrong. Clifford Burns had grown up witnessing violence. His own father, James Burns, had a history of extreme domestic abuse. In 1981, James shot Clifford's mother in Schenectady. She survived. Then, 3 years later, James abducted her during a domestic dispute. When a colony police officer responded to the scene, James Burns shot him too. The officer survived, but James Burns didn't. He turned the gun on himself during a standoff with police. ending his own life. Clifford had watched all of this unfold. He'd seen his father's rage, his mother's terror, the cycle of violence that seemed to run in his blood. And despite everything he must have known about where that path led, Clifford began walking it himself. The abuse started gradually, the way it often does. A raised voice here, an accusation there. Then it escalated. Clifford would beat Patricia, sometimes in front of the children. He'd promised to love her, to protect her, but instead he terrorized her. Harley, their daughter, would later describe the pattern with heartbreaking clarity. Her father would explode in violence, attacking her mother while the girls stood helpless, unable to intervene. Then after the storm passed, Clifford would transform. He'd come back home and, for 2 weeks, maybe 3, he'd be the best father imaginable, buying gifts, giving the girls money, taking them places, showering them with the kind of attention that made them wonder if maybe, just maybe, things had changed. But it never lasted. 2 weeks would pass, and the same old abusive father would return. The cycle would repeat, over and over, until violence became almost normal. That's what happens in homes like this. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. The unbearable becomes what you bear. Patricia tried to leave multiple times. She and Clifford separated on and off for 5 years, but she kept going back. It's easy to judge that from the outside, to wonder why someone doesn't just leave. But leaving an abuser is never that simple. There are children involved. There are finances. There are threats. There's the history of violence that makes you wonder what might happen if you really try to walk away. For Harley, her father's grief manifested in even more rage. When she moved in with him for a period thinking maybe she could help, she discovered that without her mother there to absorb his anger, she became the target instead. He'd give her money to go shopping, play the role of doting father for a day, then something would trigger him, usually talking about Patricia, and he'd turn on Harley. He'd call her vicious names. The verbal abuse became too much. Eventually, Harley decided to move back in with her mother and younger sister. By this time, Patricia had finally decided enough was enough. She filed for divorce after more than 15 years of marriage. She got an order of protection against Clifford. She moved into that small apartment in Lake Luzerne, determined to start over. For once she was choosing herself and her daughters over the man who had spent years hurting her. But Clifford Burns wasn't ready to let go. While Patricia was trying to rebuild her life, she made another unfortunate choice in men. She began dating a man named Ted Backus, a Lake Luzerne resident who seemed initially like a better option than Clifford. He wasn't. In February of 2013, 10 months before Patricia's death, Ted Backus was arrested. According to authorities, he assaulted Patricia during a dispute, then fired a gun into the ceiling of his Lake Avenue apartment before barricading himself inside for a standoff with police. The case made local headlines for a particular reason. Ted Backus was the brother of 2 Warren County Sheriff's deputies. There were whispers about special treatment, about how someone connected to law enforcement might get a lighter hand. Eventually, Backus pleaded guilty to 1 misdemeanor gun charge. He got probation and was ordered to stay away from Patricia Burns. This infuriated Clifford Burns. In his mind, Ted Backus had committed violence against Patricia. His Patricia had gotten away with it. The unfairness of it consumed him. He contacted the local newspaper multiple times, ranting about the case, about how Backus was protected because of his family connections. The irony, of course, was lost on him. Clifford Burns had spent years terrorizing Patricia himself, but in his twisted logic, he was somehow her protector. He was the only one allowed to hurt her. By the time winter arrived in 2013, Patricia and Ted Backus were no longer together. Patricia had moved on. She was dating someone else now, a neighbor, someone who treated her with kindness. She was working at community hospice, working part-time at an art supply store called Sauve Faire on Broadway. She was making plans for the holidays with her daughters. She was for the first time in years building something that looked like peace. But Clifford Burns was unraveling. In the days leading up to Christmas 2013, Clifford Burns received some news that pushed him past whatever edge he'd been clinging to. He learned that Patricia had reported him for being behind on child support payments. He'd been notified that he might face consequences, possibly even arrest, possibly have his driver's license suspended. For a man who'd spent years exerting control over Patricia through violence and intimidation, this was unbearable. She was asserting her independence, using the legal system against him. In his mind, she needed to be punished for this defiance. On December 22nd, 2 days before Christmas, Clifford sent a text message to his daughter Harley. It was cryptic and disturbing. "I have a special gift coming soon. Something for everyone to talk about, and it will be hand-delivered on foot, not by car." Harley, just 15 years old, read that message and understood exactly what her father was implying. She responded with desperate, mature beyond her years pleading. "Get it together. I know what you think you want to do, and believe me, that won't end well. The only reason you feel so bad is because of what happened between your parents. You haven't ever got the time to grieve." A teenage girl trying to talk her father down from murder, trying to save her mother's life with a text message. It didn't work. On Christmas Eve, Clifford Burns made his preparations. He dressed in full camouflage, the kind hunters wear in the woods. He armed himself with a hunting knife, and he left a note at his Niskayuna home, a note that bequeathed his possessions to his daughters. It read like a suicide note, like the words of a man who didn't expect come back. Later, his lawyers would argue that Clifford left that note because he planned to violate the order of protection to see his daughters and thought he'd be arrested. But the district attorney saw it differently. She saw it as evidence of premeditation, evidence that Clifford Burns knew exactly what he was about to do. It was early evening on December 24th when Patricia Burns stood in her small kitchen, preparing dinner for herself and her daughters. Christmas Eve, a time that's supposed to be filled with warmth and anticipation, with the gentle comfort of family tradition. Outside, the winter sun had already set. Lake Luzerne was quiet, peaceful. Most families were inside their homes, wrapping last-minute presents or setting out cookies for Santa Claus. Then came the knock on the door. Patricia went to answer it. Before she could react, a masked man forced his way into the apartment. He wasn't there to talk. He wasn't there to plead or reason or even to say goodbye to his daughters. Clifford Burns was there to kill his wife. He attacked Patricia immediately, stabbing her with the hunting knife he'd brought. Patricia's daughter, Megan Jenkins, 22 years old, heard the commotion and rushed to help her mother. She threw herself between Patricia and the attacker, trying desperately to fight him off. During the struggle, Megan managed to pull away the mask. It was Clifford, the girl's father, Patricia's husband of 15 years. Clifford stabbed Megan repeatedly in the arms. The wounds were deep, one of them cutting all the way to the bone and narrowly missing a major artery. But Megan kept fighting, kept trying to protect her mother, even as her own blood poured onto the floor. 14-year-old Autumn witnessed the entire attack. She stood frozen in horror, watching her father stab her mother again and again. 5 times, each wound delivered with the kind of rage that goes beyond reason. Patricia staggered, trying to stay on her feet. Clifford looked at her and said words that would later be entered into court testimony. "You are going to die in this house tonight." Then he fled. Autumn, moving through shock and terror, grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The recording of that call is almost unbearable to hear. A 14-year-old girl, hysterical, screaming that her mother is bleeding out on the floor, begging for help, telling the dispatcher that her father did this. Help came as quickly as it could. Emergency responders rushed Patricia and Megan to Glens Falls Hospital. Doctors worked frantically on Megan's slashed arms, managing to save her despite the severity of the wounds. But for Patricia, there was nothing they could do. The chest wounds were too deep, too many. She'd lost too much blood. Harley Burns, who'd been elsewhere when the attack happened, arrived at the hospital and begged to see her mother. A nurse tried to stop her, tried to spare her the sight. "You don't want to see her like this," the nurse said gently. But Harley pushed past. "I don't care," she said. "I want to feel my mom's hand. I want to feel her warmth." She held her mother's hand as Patricia's body cooled. The warmth was already fading. Patricia Burns was pronounced dead on Christmas Eve, 2013. She was 42 years old, a mother of 5, a hospice nurse who'd spent years bringing comfort to dying strangers, but couldn't find safety in her own home. After stabbing Patricia and Megan, Clifford Burns got into his vehicle and drove away from Lake Luzerne. Police were already looking for him, already broadcasting his description. They didn't have to look long. Clifford led authorities on a high-speed chase through Warren County, But he wasn't trying to escape. He drove directly to the Warren County Sheriff's Office in Lake George and pulled into the parking lot. Under Sheriff Sean Lamourie had just been called into duty on Christmas Eve. He arrived to find Clifford Burns calmly waiting in the parking lot. Clifford took off his camouflage jacket and surrendered without resistance. It was an almost surreal ending to a horrific crime. A man who just murdered his wife in front of their children, driving directly to the police station as if turning himself in was the logical conclusion to his plan. Inside the interrogation room, Clifford Burns gave a statement that was captured on video. The recording reveals a man full of rage, but also a man trying to justify what he'd done. He talked about Patricia's boyfriend, Ted Backus, about how Backus had gotten special treatment after assaulting Patricia. He ranted about child support, about feeling persecuted. At one point during the interrogation, Clifford learned that the detective interviewing him had worked on the Backus case. His rage exploded. He cursed at the detective, calling him names. Then he made a chilling statement. "I had AK-47s, AR-15s at my disposal. I could have made this a war. You're lucky you're in my right mind, because I was going to have a shootout with you. But I did it the right way. I handled it like a man, so thank you." Handled it like a man. Those were the words Clifford Burns used to describe stabbing his wife to death in front of their daughters on Christmas Eve. He also claimed he'd blacked out during the attack, that he didn't intend to kill Patricia. He said he was under extreme emotional distress. But the evidence told a different story. The camouflage, the knife, the note left at home, the text message sent 2 days earlier. The premeditation was clear. Clifford Burns was charged with second-degree murder. In the days after Patricia's death, the community of Lake Luzerne mourned. Neighbors who'd moved to the area to escape violence were shaken. The street where Patricia died remained quiet, subdued. As investigators processed the scene, Patricia's co-workers at Community Hospice remembered her as an outstanding caregiver. Her employer at Sauvé Fair, the art supply store, recalled her as devoted and hard-working, always friendly to customers. Friends set up a fund to help Patricia's children, who'd lost their mother and now faced an uncertain future. Patricia's funeral was held on December 30th at Blessed Sacrament Church in Albany. Friends and family gathered to say goodbye to a woman who'd given so much to others. Her obituary listed her surviving children, Nicholas, Megan, Harley, and Autumn, and Crystalline, who died 3 years earlier. The family torn apart by violence and grief. Meanwhile, Clifford Burns sat in Warren County Jail, without bail. His lawyer initially filed a notice indicating they'd pursue a defense of extreme emotional disturbance, a psychiatric defense that, if successful, could reduce the charge from second-degree murder to first-degree manslaughter. But in April of 2014, something unexpected happened. Clifford Burns pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in Warren County Court. The plea came after Warren County District Attorney Kate Hogan arranged for Clifford to speak with his daughters. Harley and Autumn, the girls who'd witnessed their mother's murder, urged their father to accept responsibility. They wanted to spare themselves the ordeal of testifying at trial. They didn't want to relive that Christmas Eve in open court. Clifford, in tears, agreed to plead guilty. In exchange, he'd receive 23 years to life in prison instead of the maximum 50 years to life. But then, just days before his sentencing in September, Clifford Burns tried to take it back. He filed a motion to withdraw his guilty plea, claiming he'd been too emotionally distraught to make an intelligent decision. He argued that his lawyer had been ineffective, that the district attorney had manipulated him by dangling his daughters in front of him, that he'd been coerced. He claimed he never intended to kill Patricia. He said the knife that killed her wasn't even his, that it was a knife Patricia owned. He insisted he'd only gone to the apartment to deliver Christmas presents to his daughters. Judge John S. Hall Jr. heard the arguments and denied the motion. The guilty plea would stand. On September 5, 2014, Clifford Burns appeared in Warren County Court for sentencing. 15-year-old Harley Burns stood before the court and addressed her father. The details of what she said aren't fully public, but the impact was visible. Clifford Burns reacted emotionally as his daughter spoke, likely hearing about the devastation he'd caused, the childhood he'd stolen from her and her sister. District Attorney Kate Hogan presented evidence of premeditation, the note left at Clifford's home, bequeathing his possessions to his daughters as if he knew he wouldn't return. The text message sent 2 days before the murder, the fact that Clifford arrived at Patricia's apartment wearing camouflage and carrying a knife. Clifford's lawyer, Garfield Raymond, argued that the knife wasn't brought by Clifford but was owned by Patricia. He continued to push the narrative of extreme emotional disturbance, trying to paint Clifford as a man who'd snapped rather than a man who'd planned. Judge Hall wasn't swayed. He sentenced Clifford Burns to 23 years to life in prison. Additionally, Clifford was barred from having any contact with his 2 daughters, Harley and Autumn, until the year 2045. The girls would be middle-aged women before their father could legally contact them. Clifford Burns was sent to Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, a maximum security prison. He would be eligible for parole in 2036, more than 2 decades away. His lawyer promised to appeal. Clifford Burns didn't give up. In 2015, his case went before the state Supreme Court Appellate Division. His lawyer, Matthew Hugg, argued that Clifford had been coerced into pleading guilty, that the meeting with his daughters had left him too emotionally distraught to make a rational decision. He wanted to argue extreme emotional distress from the beginning, but the district attorney dangled his daughters in front of him, and they all talked him into taking the plea. Hugg told the court, District Attorney Kate Hogan countered that Clifford had been represented by counsel during the plea. He'd been asked repeatedly if he understood what he was doing, and if he wanted to plead guilty. He'd said yes every time. The plea deal had spared his daughters the trauma of testifying and had given him a sentence far less than the maximum. His attorney said it was what he wanted. Hogan stated simply. The appellate court reviewed the case and issued its decision in November 2015. The justices found no merit in Clifford's claims. They noted that his daughters had urged him to accept the plea deal to spare them the ordeal of a trial, and to avoid the potential 50-year sentence. They found that Clifford had been competent at the time of the plea, that he'd been properly advised by counsel, and that there was no evidence of coercion. The conviction stood. There would be no new trial. Clifford Burns remained in prison, his appeals exhausted, his claims rejected. Years have passed since that terrible Christmas Eve. The story of Patricia Burns faded from headlines, replaced by other tragedies, other crimes. But for the people who loved her, the loss never fades. Her daughters grew up without their mother. Harley and Autumn, who witnessed the attack, carry those memories with them. Megan Jenkins, who fought so bravely to protect Patricia, bears the physical and emotional scars. Nicholas, Patricia's oldest, lost the woman who'd given him life. The community of Lake Luzerne, that peaceful haven where people go to escape violence, was reminded that darkness can find you anywhere, that orders of protection are just pieces of paper, that sometimes, despite every warning sign, tragedy comes anyway. Patricia Burns spent her career caring for people in their final moments. She understood death intimately, professionally. She held the hands of strangers as they left this world, offering them dignity and comfort. But when her own moment came, it wasn't peaceful. It wasn't dignified. It was violent and terrifying, and happened in front of the children she loved most in the world. Those who worked with Patricia at Community Hospice remember her treating every patient with the utmost compassion. She never rushed. She never treated death as routine. Even though she saw it constantly, she understood that these moments mattered. Her own death mattered too. Not just because of the crime itself, but because of who she was. A mother. A caregiver, a woman who brought light into dark places. Clifford Burns sits in Clinton Correctional Facility, maintaining his claims of innocence, insisting he never meant to kill Patricia. But the evidence speaks clearly. The premeditation, the violence, the words he spoke as he stabbed her. You are going to die in this house tonight. He will likely die in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until 2036, when he'll be 68 years old. By then, his daughters will be well into middle age. They may choose never to see him again. The orders of protection that bar him from contacting them don't expire until 2045. By then, Harley will be 47. Autumn will be 46, both potentially with families of their own. Children who will never know the grandfather who murdered their grandmother. It's late now. The story is told. Patricia Burns lived 42 years. She worked hard. She loved her children. She tried to find happiness and safety and never quite found either. On Christmas Eve, most people think about miracles and joy. about children's laughter and the comfort of tradition. But for Harley and Autumn Burns, for Megan Jenkins, Christmas Eve will forever be the night their mother died. The night their father became a murderer. The night their childhood ended in blood on a kitchen floor. There are no easy answers here. No simple explanations for why Clifford Burns chose violence. Domestic abuse is complicated, rooted in control and rage, and patterns that often span generations. Clifford watched his own father terrorize his mother. Then he did the same to Patricia. The cycle repeated until it ended in murder. Perhaps that's the lesson, if there is one, that violence begets violence. That trauma unhealed becomes trauma inflicted. That orders of protection and legal systems and good intentions sometimes aren't enough to keep people safe. Patricia tried to leave. She did everything right. She got the divorce. She got the order of protection. She moved to a new town. She built a new life. And still, Clifford Burns found her. Still, he killed her. That's the reality of domestic violence. The most dangerous time for a victim is often when they try to leave, when they assert their independence, when they say enough. Patricia said enough, and she paid for it with her life. But her story doesn't end with her death. It continues in her children, who survived and who carry her memory. It continues in the patients she cared for, who died with dignity because Patricia was there. It continues in the coworkers who remember her compassion, in the friends who recall her energy and laughter. Clifford Burns took Patricia's life, but he couldn't take her legacy. Let this story settle now. Let it drift into the quiet corners of your mind as sleep approaches. Patricia Burns was real. Her suffering was real. Her death was real. But so was her life. So was her kindness. So was the light she brought into dark places. Remember her not just as a victim, but as a person, a mother, a nurse, a woman who deserved better than she got. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.